All right. Irish Breakdown fans, IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, we are back for another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Friday. You know what that means, Ryan? It means it is time to make some predictions, but we're going to have a little bit of a pregame first because this week we decided we needed to talk a little bit about Notre Dame the first couple of days of the week, so we didn't get quite as much done in our preparation for the matchup, specifically the matchup of UNLV and Notre Dame. So today, before we begin our predictions aspect of this show, which will start with Notre Dame, and then we'll kind of go into the big games of the weekend, we'll finish things off with a mailbag, so if you have questions, get them in now, and we will answer them. We're going to start with some keys to the game, right? Which is normally what we do on Thursday, but today we're going to do it to kick off our show. So we're going to discuss sort of the four keys that we see to victory for Notre Dame, but it's going to be bigger than just beating UNLV because honestly, Notre Dame could run out and do real simple, basic stuff and beat UNLV as long as they don't screw things up. And that doesn't mean you got better as a football team, right? I mean, it just doesn't. These keys are going to be about Notre Dame not only winning this game, but things that they need to do to not only win this game, but more importantly, put themselves in position to then roll into these next few games in order to have an opportunity for some upset victories, which is what after this game, the next two games will likely have to be upset victories over ranked opponents. Now, whether or not Notre Dame is favored at home against Clemson, I don't see why they would be. Whether they're favored to beat Syracuse on the road, who knows? I don't know what those early lines are going to look like. Haven't looked, but they're going to be ranked higher than Notre Dame. So it will require upsets. So that's what the focus is going to be for today. I want to begin with the offense, Ryan, because this is the side of the ball that draws the most attention. Now, I don't think the defense has necessarily played great either. It's played well enough to win, but we've yet to see a great performance from the defense. I mean, they're only giving up, low 20s. They haven't given up a lot of points this year. The only team that's gone over 30 is the team that did so late in a blowout win. They've held opponents to 21, 19, 17, 20, and 16 points in the other 5 games besides the North Carolina game, which, again, they gave up some garbage touchdowns late, but they haven't had a great performance yet. So that side of the ball has to get better as well, and we'll get to that. But let's be honest, the offense is the side of the ball that has kept Notre Dame from winning football games, and that's the side of the ball that has drawn the most angst. That is the side of the ball that needs to make the biggest jumps in improvement, and even more so than last year. I mean, they were struggling on offense last year, Ryan, but they weren't this bad. We saw a big jump in the second half of the year last year. They're going to need to make another similar jump this year, and I think it's got to start on Saturday against UNLV. And, we'll discuss the keys, Ryan, and we'll make predictions, but if the offense doesn't at least start to gain some momentum in this game, I fear that the second half of the season is going to be a lot of what we saw in the first half of the season, except against an arguably tougher start to finish schedule.
Well, I mean, Brian, we don't sugarcoat anything on this show, right? So it's the simple fact of UNLV is an inferior opponent from a talent perspective, from just from a program perspective. I mean, it's no conversation as far as that goes. And you're sitting here where you had a nice performance the second half against Cal, which brought you some momentum going into North Carolina against a bad defense, and then you maintained it a little bit. You had an okay performance against BYU. But then you have kind of a jaw back to reality last week against Stanford. So now, it's something where when you gain momentum, you also lost the momentum again, right? Like you just got kind of knocked back a couple pegs the last game. So this is a big opportunity for Notre Dame because the one time that they have gained some sort of momentum, they eventually lost it, right? So it's not only just gaining the momentum against UNLV, it's making it sustainable, right? Because you knew watching a couple of those games, I think especially BYU, for instance, right? We knew that it was nice that Notre Dame had some success offensive, but you also knew that a lot of it wasn't incredibly sustainable, right? Like
It
some of
was
the
your
things
dudes
that
are better than their dudes. That's what it was.
100%. 100%. And this needs to be a full ditch effort, right? Like it's not just about players playing well. The coaches need to come out and have a big game in this game. You need to see some legitimate changes on the offensive side of the football. If you don't see that, then I'm going to feel the same way, right? Like I think someone said in the chat, like, early before the show even started, that Notre Dame could win this game 42-10, and you wouldn't necessarily feel good about this game. And you're 100% correct. You're 100%. You need to see legitimate growth. We know that Notre Dame has more talent. That's never going to be a question in this matchup, right? It's about evolution of the offense.
Right.
It's about cohesiveness. It's about players and coaches being on the same page and believing in the same message. That's what the opportunity is for Notre Dame tomorrow. It's not about having a good performance. It's about having a good, sustainable performance.
Right.
Those things need
Something
to coexist.
you can build on. 100%
Exactly.
agree. I think you nailed it, Ryan. It's about, are you setting a foundation for success for the second half of the season? And that's the key. So what does that look like, Ryan? I think the biggest one is obvious. I hinted about it yesterday. I said that this is going to continue to be key number one until they start doing it, and that is starting fast. This is a team on offense that lacks confidence. It is a team on offense that's not having confidence instilled in them and how they prepare. And you look at it, Ryan, and it's one of those things where they come out slow in every capacity. It's not just about slow from a result standpoint, but it's slow from a tempo standpoint. It's slow from a how they attack defenses standpoint. It's slow from a how the players come off the ball standpoint. There is zero urgency with this offensive football team, and it's even worse at the beginning of games. It's almost like they don't really show any kind of energy until they fall behind. Can't do that, because if you do that, you'll lose to Syracuse, you'll lose to Clemson, you'll lose to USC, and it's not a given that you'll beat Navy and Boston College, right? With the way that they control the clock, the way that Navy controls the clock, and BC is a weird team. They're bad, but they're always prone to that because they have talent, that one game where they just play out of their minds. And again, if you can lose to Stanford, you can lose to Boston College. Okay, it's as simple as that. So it's about coming out and showing some energy, showing some emotion, showing some fire, receivers flying off the ball, linemen coming off the ball and drilling people, Drew Pine coming out, being sharp and crisp, a good game plan that doesn't – I mean, that's the thing is the coaching staff with its game plan intentionally slows down the offense. And then you're shocked that they start slow. I mean, this isn't rocket science as much as Tommy Rees tries to make it that. So it's about coming out with tempo, coming out with pace. I was a little concerned by what Coach Freeman said yesterday. He was talking about how they're practicing not on a script, that they're just kind of, there's a lot of things he said yesterday I liked, but there was one comment about the answer to this is kind of treating practice like a game where the guys don't know the call. They have to look and get the call from the sideline. And that's fine if that's what you're doing as part of a tempo offense, but it also could be that it's the same thing. They're running the scan in practice, which without letting the players know, which again, that's not how you gain an early fast start. And so that sounded to me like they're grasping at straws offensively. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong, but that's a concern that I have. But if we are not correct in that assumption, and they're practicing it the right way, meaning they are going more tempo, getting the look from the sideline, then going to call, that's actually a good thing. Because if you haven't run tempo much this year, you need to practice tempo. And the best way to practice tempo is to not necessarily have the calls. You got to, let's go quick, get the call, line up and go. And I think that would be a good thing. So again, how that comment can be perceived in a lot of different ways. How it actually manifests is going to determine if this is going to be a team that can come out and start fast. And then all the things that entails. And starting fast means moving the ball up and down the field on your first several drives and putting points on the board. That's what starting fast means. And that's what this offense has to do in this game, right?
I mean, practically speaking, right? Offensively, you are lacking an identity and a rhythm right now, right? So starting fast gets you an early rhythm and it starts to make you feel more confident. But more than anything, Brian, I've talked a lot about this week, weeks past. Just not a lot of energy on this team, right? Like there's not. And I think that some part of it may be, it's kind of subconscious a little bit, but if you don't start fast in a football game, it's easy to kind of turn, and to start to feel a little skeptical about, we haven't been doing really well offensively. We got off to another slow start. Is it just business as usual kind of on this season? We're just going to start slow. And I think that getting off to a fast start, both offensively and even defensively, could be a big boost to this team as far as the energy, because it's a lot easier to buy in when things are going well, right? It's hard sometimes to fight through the adversity. I know that's where leadership is obviously born, but for this team, especially a team that lacks confidence, they lack an energy, getting off to a strong start, I think will kind of exude that into them. And I want to see this team play loose. I really do think as this team gets more energy and gets more confidence, that we'll start seeing them play a little loose. I think there's a part of it that coaching needs to help them play loose a lot more than they have. But I think the other part of it is that this team needs to experience more success early on in games. If they experience more success early on in games, I believe that they'll play a little more loose. I think they'll play a little bit free, and I think that they need that. Not necessarily just in the UNLV game, but to your point to begin this podcast, for the rest of the season. You need to start starting a lot faster, because it's going to start giving you more energy in football games.
So, your point is good in that there's nothing you can say to these players that's going to instill confidence in them. They need to have success. They need to experience success. That's going to be the key for this team. If they can experience success, then this team will have a chance to get rolling. That's how it's going to be. So that's what they have to do, and that's going to be a key to success for this football team. So looking forward to kind of seeing if they're able to do that, Ryan. It's going to tell us a lot about this football team if they are able to do that. Key number 2, limit the scan, push the tempo. This is the one I'm least optimistic that they're going to, in fact, do. But the reality is one of the best ways to get into a rhythm is to go. It is tried and true. It is not only a way to get them rolling, Ryan, but everything that they say they are this young, inexperienced, not great depth at the receiver position, really good at running back. And there's, questions about how much talent they have. I had someone responded to the article that I did on Twitter about how they need to push the tempo. Somebody said Notre Dame doesn't have the talent to do RPOs. And I'm thinking, you have no clue what an RPO is, right? I mean, an RPO is something you do at times. Some teams do because they don't necessarily have talent to win on the perimeter receiver. It is amazing to me how some people come to the conclusions that they have about certain things. And you're just like, I don't even know how to address that. It is so wildly misguided. I don't even know how to address it. So I just ignore it. But it is definitely a part of what they need to do. It's about getting into an early rhythm. And when you go line up, stop, look at the sideline, look back. Now the defense has to move around. Now you've got to get an adjustment on the read of the defense, all those type of things. It kills rhythm. Now, it's great for the offensive coordinator who can then go back and say, well, hey, I got us in the right call. But by doing it the way you did it, you have limited the opportunity and the odds that your team is going to have success, especially a young football team, especially a team that we're told by alums doesn't have talent. This is the last thing you should be doing in that instance. My hope is that has changed. We shall see. But if they come out and push the tempo, limit the scan, because every team looks to the sideline to get calls at times. That's fine. There's a time and a place for that. But they've so poisoned that very notion that anytime Notre Dame fans see it, they're just going to lose it now because of just the absurdity and how much they've done it the last couple of weeks. And it's mind blowing to see it and to understand why. It makes no sense. So key number 2, limit the scan, push the tempo, make the adjustments we talked about that allow you to get into an early rhythm. Mix up your run game. Get the ball out on the perimeter, RPOs, do things that allow Drew Pine to get into an early rhythm. And I think tempo is going to be one of those things. You kind of saw it against North Carolina. Once Drew got rolling, there's no stopping him. There was nothing North Carolina could do to stop him at that point in time because he just got into that rhythm. And we saw against BYU, similar thing. Once he completed some early balls, he got into rhythm, and then he starts taking chances that you're like, okay, he probably shouldn't have thrown that ball. Oh, Drew, what are you doing? Hey, great pass. You know what I mean? Those are some of the things he was doing. And then against Stanford is the exact opposite. Early failures, false starts, pressures, batted balls, all those type of things. And then it just got him completely out of rhythm, into a funk, and he couldn't get himself out because he's a young kid who's was making his 4th career start. So it is now up to the staff to do things to make sure he gets into an early rhythm, and pushing the tempo is one of the things they can do to do that, right?
we are working in a very cohesive manner with the keys to success, right? Like these things are all super interrelated. You know, it's something where rhythm breeds confidence, confidence leads to success. That's why people play more confidently and then they kind of let loose a little bit. Like those things all kind of manifest themselves that way. And the scan offense, I mean, it's not an offense. The scan is something that I am against so much. And I know we've talked about this, Brian, because I have always been a firm believer that you do your thinking on the practice field, right? You do your thinking in the meeting rooms. You do your thinking in between quarters, at halftime, when you're making adjustments. Those are when you make your thinking process firm. Like that's when you really develop that understanding for what is expected of you. When you get on the field, practice makes perfect, right? Practice is supposed to be it's muscle memory. It's understanding of what you're looking for. So when you get on a football field, it's supposed to just go, man. Your body knows what it's supposed to be doing already. It knows what it's supposed to do on a certain play. It knows what it's supposed to do against a certain check. Those things are supposed to be ingrained in you the time the game comes around. And I think that the scan offense is a perfect representation of forcing players to think too much, getting them uncomfortable. We talked about being loose. We talked about being explosive. We talked about having fun. Those things only happen when a player's not thinking so much, man. I'm okay with the scan occasionally. You know, if there's a big play, like it's a 4th and 1, 4th and 2, and you have to get in the perfect play, sure. If it's a big moment of the game, I'm fine with it. But the constant scan stuff just hurts your team, especially a team that has not been able to get in rhythm consistently this season. Those things hurt you. So I am fully on board. I'm about to start the Twitter hashtag, man. Hashtag ban the scan. It's over with. I don't want to see it ever again unless it's in a very big moment in the game, especially not a part of the consistency of the offense. It's not going to help this team right now, especially this one.
When you look at these different aspects of this, Ryan, it really comes down to I fear that the offensive staff, and it may be limited to one particular offensive coach, or perhaps we'll see, because he's the one who has the autonomy to do whatever he wants on offense. But I feel like he has no ability to at least let me rephrase. He has not shown this season, and I'm not trying to take a shot. I'm trying to offer a legitimate, constructive criticism of him. He has not shown the ability this season to be able to understand causality, right? Like you can look at the end result and say, well, I called the right play. It wasn't executed. Okay. Why? Now he said all the right things during the week of practice. Well, it's ultimately on me, but saying it's on me simply conveys ownership of it's your responsibility as the offensive coordinator. It doesn't mean that you understand the causality of why these things are getting missed, why they were getting missed against BYU, why they were getting missed against North Carolina. Because what did we say after the North Carolina game? They left at least 17 points on the board in that game, right? Because of the similar mistakes. Same thing against North Carolina, same thing against Marshall, same thing against Ohio State. This team has left a lot of points on the field this season. They are not bad like the 2007 offense was bad, in that offense could not move the ball. This offense is bad in that they just constantly shoot themselves in the foot and miss opportunities that are otherwise there. And then so you have two things you can do, Ryan. You can look at it and say, well, hey, I'm calling plays that are getting dudes open. I can't throw the ball for them and block and block and catch and all this stuff for them. You can do that, and technically you're right. But clearly there's something wrong with how you're going about your business and how you go about sort of preparing your guys to execute, that you have to be able to look at as like, okay, is this lack of rhythm the fact that we're so slow between plays, is that something that's playing into our inability to then play fast when the ball snapped? Is that something? Is it the way that we're practicing? Is it the specific process of drills that we go through? Is there a way that we can alter this, alter that? But you have to, as a coach, to truly be successful, be able to look at your operation and say, okay, this is the end result. This is the cause. Let's fix that. And the only way that we're going to see some change this week is if they can understand causality. And if they can, then you're going to be able to look at this and say, adjust it. We've got to stop doing this, limit this. We've got to adjust here. We've got to do this. And then our guys will play with the confidence they need to go execute at a high level. And that's the thing. Execution is the end game, right? It's the result. The process is what has to be correct to then lead to that proper result. And that's what so far the staff has shown an ability to do. And I believe one of the things they need to do to fix it is something they did last year, which is go faster. Just put a greater sense of urgency in everything that they do. And if they do that, I think they'll be okay. And that's key number 2. Yep. Key number 3, Ryan, we talked about this yesterday, so we won't talk about it a ton. This is a week where they have to get the receivers involved. Number 1, you need it for the next 5 games. Number 1, you cannot beat Clemson and USC and teams like that, Syracuse, if your receivers are not more of a factor. They don't have to be the foundation of the offense. We're not saying that, but they have to be better. They have to play with more confidence. They have to be more productive. They have to be a group that strikes more fear in the hearts of opponents, in that if you don't respect that, they can hurt you. So I think that's a big part of it. I think we pre-snap, getting more movement in how they line up, adjusting your alignments. If your guys are struggling to get free off a press, there are things you can do to protect that. Number 1, there's one thing you can do is more stack, more pre-snap, short motions, more motioning across. Simple things like inverting your alignment. Take your slot guy, put him on the line, and take your outside guy, put him off the ball. It gives them more room to kind of work and move and make moves and those type of things. There's a lot of things that you can do. Also altering who's in the game. I said it. I'll stick by it. I wrote this week. If Deion Colzie or Tobias Merriweather, if one of those 2 guys is not on the field for all but 10 plays this game, you're not doing this right, because you need to give your young 6 foot, not big armed, not great ball placement quarterback bigger targets, and not just tight ends, but also on the perimeter. That's exactly what Ian Book had when he first stepped into the starting lineup in 2018, and you saw how that affected him. He had one small target, Chris Fink. The rest of his targets were minimum 6'4.5" or taller. And it allowed him to just say, man, just throw the ball up. Let those guys go make those plays. And it gave him confidence that I can go make these plays. So that's another part of it. But schematically too, Ryan, they got to do things to they've got to game plan and scheme the receivers into success. RPOs are part of that, but also with the play action and dropbacks. They've got to do things that are utilizing the specific talents in a way that exploits their ability. We haven't seen that a lot this year. We need to see that against UNLV. And what it'll tell me is if they do it schematically, not just if the receivers run by the UNLV guys in the same routes they've done all year, and UNLV's DBs stink. They do. They're not very good. And you have success doing the same stuff you've been. That doesn't fix anything for me, because you will not do it to Garrett Williams next week. You just won't. And so that's the key, is I need to see some adjustments in how you're using them, which then creates opportunities for success.
It's going back to the sustainability thing when we talked about it in the beginning of the show, right? Like Notre Dame could line up and run the ball 50 times and probably win this football game. Like they could do that to you, right? They could just feature Michael Mayer and they could probably win this football game. But does that help you beat Syracuse? Does that help you beat Clemson? Because I know one thing, if you are a one-dimensional offense or one-dimensional passing attack against Clemson, they'll tee off on you, man, because the less they have to prepare for, really, the less that they have to fear is playing into their hands, because we know that is a defensive football team. So that is like the worst possible situation, because next week, to your point, Brian, I mean, if Notre Dame's wide receivers aren't making plays, they'll just say Garrett Williams and Deuce Chestnut, you're playing man-to-man all game to let our other guys kind of move around more freely and create opportunities. Like those things are going to be created. You can't leave this game where your leader in receiving yards, wide receiver last week, is Tobias Merriweather off of one catch for 41 yards. That was your leading receiver. Your second leading receiver was Lorenzo Styles with 2 catches for 15 yards. That's unacceptable, man. It's unacceptable, because now people have this assumption that there's no talent in the wide receiver room, and we know that to not be true. And where is potentially your biggest advantage offensively? I mean, you have a big advantage offensive line versus defensive line, but wide receivers versus these defensive backs, man, are a huge advantage athletically.
I would argue that's the great advantage for Notre Dame, not because Notre Dame's receivers are as good as the offensive linemen, but the defensive line at UNLV and the backers are significantly better than their secondary players.
I agree 100%.
Yes.
I agree 100%. I don't even think it's close, man. Like, honestly, I watched a couple of the games for UNLV's defense, and it was hard to find positives out of the secondary, man. Like, it's just not a good unit. And I understand that Notre Dame's wide receiver room has not played up to their potential, but from an athleticism perspective, it's just not even close, man. Like, they're just on a different caliber of athlete, from their wide receivers to UNLV's defensive back. So even talking about just this game, you need to have a kick up because that could be a huge advantage point for you. And then moving forward, for it to be sustainable, your wide receivers have to be productive. They need confidence. They need confidence.
Ryan, I'm going to push back. You're correct from a production standpoint, and I'm not pushing back on you per se, but the perception out there of people saying, well, the receivers haven't played well. Production doesn't equal play. So I had somebody say Lorenzo Styles hasn't played well all year. And, kind of push back on a little bit. He said, well, receiver one needs 80 yards a game, and he hasn't got to that yet. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not a result of him not playing well. That's a result of him getting the opportunities. Now, Lorenzo is the one guy that I will say, because I was simply referring to the time of Carolina and BYU. I thought Lorenzo played well in those two games. He has not played well in the other games. I think Lorenzo Styles is the one guy that I would say, in my opinion, has not played to his potential this season. I think every other receiver out there that's played has been a guy that has done things you need him to do when put in situations where you're playing to their skill sets. Mm-hmm. That's where I think the problem is. I think they haven't been used correctly, more so than saying they haven't played to their potential. I mean, Tobias Merriweather, when given the opportunity, showed that's a dude. And Jaden Thomas, when used correctly, has shown this kid can make plays. Then you go back against Stanford and ask him to do things that he shouldn't be asked to do. So same thing with Braden Lindsey, and to a degree, true of Lorenzo Styles as well. But Lorenzo has had opportunities to make plays this year, and he's just dropped really simple stuff. I'm not talking about not catching contested one-on-one. I'm talking about like crossing routes, things like that. We're seeing him not come off the line hard. We're seeing him not show just a lot of urgency. Yeah,
drop flat routes last week. I mean,
not,
just not blocking.
Right,
just
the ball wasn't great by Drew Pine, but you got to make that catch, right? I mean, you're supposed to be the 100%. Top receiver. You've got to make that catch. So the rest of those guys, I think that it's about are that you're not using them correctly, and so that's the thing that I want to see here, Ryan. Is I want to see them use the receivers correctly, and then it's up to the receivers to produce or not. And if they don't, then you can say, hey, they're just not good enough. And that's why I've always said, you can't tell me something's not good enough if you haven't used that thing properly. So it's like, if I buy you a car and I say, hey, this is the car you're going to use to drive to work every day, and it's a stick shift and you don't know how to drive a stick and you're just jacking the whole thing up. I mean, this car is not getting me where I need to get. Like, well, it's not a car problem. That's a you problem, right? Learn how to drive a stick. I don't know how to drive a stick, right? So it's the premise of that is, what is the reason for it? Is the vehicle to get to this level of success isn't good enough, all of the receivers, or you're not using the vehicle properly, so it's not getting you where you need to get to, right?
Yep.
And that's where the thing is. Once you then use it correctly, okay, I got you a vehicle that doesn't get you where it needs to get to, right? You're using it correctly, you're driving it correctly, keeps breaking down, you have to, all these type of things, and we can say, okay, yeah, my bad, I got you a lemon. I'm sorry about that, right? That's kind of my thing, and that's what this game presents you as an opportunity, because this is the perfect game to say, let's build around the receivers a little bit more to build up their confidence, because this is a secondary that's simply not good. It's the worst secondary you're going to face. You're not going to face the only other secondary that's potentially in the same conversation is Navy, and I would even argue Navy has a couple better players in the secondary than what UNLV has.
Yeah.
So if you can't do it this week, Ryan, it's just not going to happen, and it just tells me that you just have you don't have an understanding of what you're doing wrong in allowing you to get them in position. So that's my deal.
I mean, we see this 100% on the same page. I think from a production perspective, let's just take it from that vantage point, right? If you don't get things out of your wide receiver group this week, to your point, Brian, it's not going to happen this year, man.
Right.
It's just not going to, because it's not going to get easier from here. It's going to get harder. This is the week where you build that confidence. If you can't build it this week, then I don't know when you're going to build it. I really don't, because even against Navy, you might be able to have some success in the passing game and out wide, but you might have limited possessions comparative to most games, so that's less opportunities. I mean, this has to be the game. This has to be the game, because this is a game where Notre Dame could have the ball a ton, because we know UNLV, if you're able to kind of slow the run game down, they have no problem letting the ball fly. They'll throw the ball out there. It's going to, cut the clock at times when there's incomplete passes and penalties, all that type of stuff. So Notre Dame's going to have a lot of opportunities in this game. So if they're not able to capitalize on the opportunities against UNLV, wide receiver wise, It's just probably not going to happen this year. It's just probably not. And it's at that point, it's almost like a wasted season at the position, and which is very detrimental to the program moving forward.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Last one on offense, and should be a simple one, Ryan. It's get back to using the running backs more effectively. You saw 3 running backs can do a lot of different things, basically just run up the middle the entire game last week against loaded boxes. Yeah, you had a big run by Diggs here and a nice run by Tyree there, but it was more because your dudes are just better than their dudes. Get back to using 21 personnel effectively. Get back to mixing up the looks, finding ways to get your running backs isolated in the pass game, find ways to use your running backs, your second running back in ways at 21 personnel to then open up creases in the run game, which we've seen. We saw that it was done so well against Cal and North Carolina. They came out against Cal and they used a motion to get Chris Tyree free, and then they used Chris Tyree's motion later to get Audric Estime free for a big play. Then they came out the next week and used that same motion to open up an opportunity for Audric Estime to just rip them with inside zone for a big gain. There was so much creativity with the running backs, and then they went away from it. And it wasn't like, oh, BYU defended it or Stanford defended it. They just stopped using it for some insane reason to me. Get back to that. I think the running backs in this game could be a big, big mismatch because the way that UNLV plays, it's going to force them to have their linebackers against the running backs. And if you're able to use the running back movement in the run game, then that's where you can all of a sudden see somebody vacate a gap that allows your running backs to rip off big plays. So run game and pass game, I think proper usage of the running backs, which not only is proper schematic usage of them in the run game, so not just duo, counter, mixing those things up, but more so using the pre-snap movements, using those type of things. Yes, Chris Tyree made a mistake on alignment last week. It happens, right? Correct it, move on. Don't. My fears are the result of the way Tommy Rees operates is, he made a mistake, he's not playing, or we're not going to use him again on that, right? That's BS. Use all of them. Use their unique skill sets. Do things to stress the defense. I would argue there aren't, but maybe a couple backfields in the country that have the versatility of skill to be able to threaten opposing defenses in more ways than what Notre Dame can do with their running backs. We saw it against North Carolina. We saw it, late first quarter and late first half and then the second half against Cal, and then it disappeared. Get back to it. If they can get back to it, then I think this offense, if they do these 4 things, they will destroy UNLV. It's that simple. They will, even if they don't necessarily make all of the schematic changes that we think they should do. If they execute and make the adjustments here, then they're gonna rip UNLV apart. I really believe that.
For that couple game stretch where you started feeling better about the offense, Brian, what was the big key? I mean, offensive line was playing better, of course, but the diversity with how they were using the running backs in the run and pass game was what got you so excited. I mean, you saw a lot of 21 personnel with 2 backs and just using them in different ways and motioning guys to get the eye discipline on the second level away from them and just hitting, inside or outside zone and doing all those types of things, man. You have such a great mixture. We've talked about it in nauseam at this point. A trio of Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, and Chris Tyree. I would put those 3 from a fit perspective against anyone in the country, man. It is a really talented trio of backs, not even counting Jabron Payne, who hasn't seen the field, not even counting Jadarian Price, who is hurt and injured right now. There's so much talent in that backfield. And when you saw it, I mean, you have seen Audric Estime run inside zone. You've seen him run duo. You've seen him run power. You've seen him used out of the backfield on angle routes. You've seen Chris Tyree, when used well, he could be an inside-out runner that could also run some jet sweeps from time to time. He could be involved in the passing game, could do some stuff in the screen game. Logan Diggs the same way. I mean, you've seen Logan Diggs used out of the backfield on wheel routes. So there's so much diversity opportunities with this running back room. For whatever reason, last game, Notre Dame was just like, nope, we are just going to run downhill, and that's all we're going to do all day, no matter who's in at running back. And that is limiting how effective 3 of your most talented offensive players can be in a football game. Be diverse, ask them to do what they're comfortable with, but more often than not, man, don't make it predictable. Putting Audric Estime in the game and just running duo all day, I know exactly what he's doing. There's no diversity to it. There's no thought process defensively. Can we have a little bit of creativity with how they use the running backs? Because if they do, it's going to be hard to stop, man. Because like one play, you're going against 230-pound Audric Estime. The next play, you have 197 lightning bolt in Chris Tyree on the field. Like, it's just so different. And that's why it makes it such a difficult task to stop when they're utilizing them correctly. And they have to get back to it this week, because last week did not fulfill the potential that the running back room has as a whole for Notre Dame.
Last 2 weeks, really. I mean, outside of two slip screens, they didn't really do a whole lot against BYU other than just keep running them between the tackles. Eventually, they ripped off a couple big plays, but you missed opportunities to really put that sucker away. Let's move on to the defense, Ryan, and talk about the 4 keys to success on defense. They're going to sound very similar, folks, because these are just – it's about they have yet to do the things we've asked them to do with any consistency. They're also very important to beating UNLV. The biggest one is dominate up front. I mean, that's an easy one, Ryan. That means 2 things. Shut down what is I would argue, below average, usually UNLV run game. They were really good against North Texas. They've been average to below average every other game. They really struggled against the better teams in the schedule. Now, again, the last 2 games, you didn't really have Doug Brumfield, which kind of limits your effectiveness with the run game. But even before that, they weren't necessarily ripping teams up consistently with their true run game. So you've got to shut that down and make this a Doug Brumfield drop back and beat you game. Yes. As much as I like him, he's a first-year starter, correct? He did not start for them last year. He is a kid that, with all the talent that he has, he's still inexperienced. He's still a kid that can get a little bit thrown off his game when he gets pressured with any kind of consistency. So that's an important piece. So it all starts when you talk about dominating up front. It starts with the run game through the pass rush. Those are the 2 ways you dominate up front. And that is a big key to beating this UNLV team, is if you can make this game be about Doug Brumfield beating you from the pocket, I feel good about Notre Dame's opportunities. They'll make some plays because they have good receivers, but you feel good about it because then they'll get some sacks, they'll get some breakups, they'll get some pressures that force some throws. That's going to be a big key, in my opinion, for Notre Dame.
Well, if you're resetting the line of scrimmage, it's huge because, I mean, even talk about Brumfield. I like Brumfield. I mean, I texted you, what was it, on like Sunday? Like, hey, man, I kind of like this UNLV quarterback. He's pretty talented.
I'm like, bro, I'm still watching the Stanford game. You know what I
mean? I know. I should have waited until Monday on that one. But it's just so funny, man, because the things, though, that makes Brumfield that lets him excel on the football field is the run game, like the threat of it, right? Because we talked about how important the RPO game is to UNLV. We talked about the screen game, play action game. I mean, Doug Brumfield is a kid that if you have a heavy run action and the defense kind of just pauses for a second, right? They just kind of float there, then he can throw the ball over your head. Like, he's got the type of vertical arm, right? So all those things fit into his skill set. But if you don't have the threat of a run game, and linebackers do not have to commit themselves as much as they would before, or safeties don't have to trigger a little, as frequently as they would have to in the run game, then it's going to be a long day for Doug Brumfield. Because I like him a lot, but if you one-on-one wise, this offensive line outside of Davian McDaniel at left tackle, I believe, is a little bit of a liability. And if you were Notre Dame, there is no reason that you shouldn't be able to win one-on-ones all day against this offensive line. So if you shut down this run game, you make it a very one-note offense, just running through the pass. You're also limiting the pass in theory because the things that make Brumfield so successful are working off of the pass. So if you shut that down, if you dominate up front, it's going to be a long day. Making this game a one-dimensional game for their offense, I think, is a huge key in this game.
Ryan, key number 2, be disciplined. That's going to be a big key. Now, when you say that, that's not just a general comment. That's also something very specific to UNLV, in my opinion, because as we discussed yesterday, UNLV is going to do a lot of things to try to get you out of your spot. They're going to do a lot of things to try to get the linebackers especially, and we'll get to them here in a little bit. They're going to do a lot of things to try to get the linebackers and safeties thinking that they're saying this, but in reality, they're doing this. They're going to quickly get the ball on the perimeter. They're going to get the ball in space, which means, what does discipline mean? Coming to balance and tackling situations, taking proper angles out to the perimeter so you don't get out leveraged outside or you don't overplay it that allows them to cut inside. It means being gap disciplined. It means being disciplined on the backside, not overplaying an outside zone action, only to find out, oh, shoot, I'm the will. They ran away from me. I sprinted away, and oh, wow, they're running a reverse back behind me. Or they're running a tunnel screen away from me, and now I'm in trouble. Now I'm out of position. It's being disciplined is a big key to this game. They're going to try double moves. They're going to try reverses. They're going to do flea flickers or trick plays. UNLV's coaches are smart. Marcus Arroyo has done a really nice job with his football team. He knows we don't have the dudes across the board, especially up front, to go out and beat Notre Dame for 60 minutes. We don't. So what we have to do is we have to do some things to allow the positions that we are confident in our players. We do like some of our perimeter matchups. We do think we have a quarterback that can make them pay for some things. So how do we do things formationally, alignment-wise, post-snap movement, moving the pocket, different things like that to then allow the skill to make plays? They're going to do all those things. And Notre Dame's way of stopping it, beginning with dominating up front, is going to be being disciplined, especially at the second and third levels. It's an absolute must in this football game, Ryan.
I can't even tell you, Brian, how many times over the first few games where linebackers' eyes are in the wrong spot and they get themselves out of position. Safeties kind of just hesitate a little bit, working, to the depth. Cornerbacks blow a coverage because their eyes are just in the wrong spot or they're unsure of what they're looking at, man. Defensive football is so built off of the instinctual nature of it, right? The going through your keys and being disciplined. And this is an undisciplined group. I mean, I would argue, Brian, that there has been spurts of really good defensive play this year. It's just one or two miscommunications in the back end that makes a game turn from a really good defensive performance into an average one, right? It's just a couple plays, man. We talked about North Carolina for the next few games afterwards. I mean, they're 3 blown coverages away from completely dominating North Carolina from start to finish defensively.
Almost 50 points a game against everybody not named Notre Dame, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. And we saw this D-line take over the Cal game too. We've seen them. Somebody in the chat said this defensive line hasn't dominated anybody. Whatever. We've seen this defensive line be that. They haven't done it consistently. Now, they're down some guys. They're not going to have Jacob Lacey in this game. They may not have Jason Adamiola this game, but the reality is this is not a very good offensive line for UNLV at all. You have to take advantage of that up front and dominate. And then, because here's what can happen, Ryan. You dominate up front. And we saw this against Alabama in 2020. The defensive line would have a great push, just blow up the Bama offensive line. But then Mac Jones would get the ball to the perimeter and somebody takes a bad angle or somebody overplays or somebody doesn't break down or somebody doesn't get off a block. And all of a sudden, a play that should have been a -2 or a 2-yard gain is a 40-yard gain. Yep. UNLV is good enough to do that against the way that this defense has played this year. So that's why discipline is so incredibly important.
Yep. It's because I was just going to say defense, Brian, is just the guys work off of each other, right? Filling a gap and then a guy kind of making a guy guess right. It's playing a particular coverage and making sure that you are disciplined to your zone in the coverage. All those things matter so heavily, right? And I think that what defensively, I mean, I even think back to that 2020 Alabama game where your defensive line looks great and then a bad angle, a missed tackle in the perimeter against a Najee Harris, and he goes 50 yards, right? Those are the types of things that if one player isn't doing their job, you sacrifice the integrity of the defense. You sacrifice the discipline. So as a whole, second and third levels need to really keep that discipline intact because they are a few plays every game away from being a very good defense. Not just a good defense. They're on the cusp if they just do a couple little things right, where you could argue that this is a very good to excellent unit potentially. But right now, they're not there because of too many miscues.
And why does that happen? Because it's because same with offense, you're putting far too much on their plate, which is preventing them from playing fast and fundamentally sound. Give me a fast, fundamentally sound defense over what we've seen from Notre Dame the first 6 games any day of the week. Let your players play. You have the talent. Let them play. Stop making it about how smart you are. Make it about them. And if they do that, they should be okay. Key number 3, Ryan, get the ball. What we're seeing this year is all the issues on defense are a byproduct of what we just talked about. Somebody asked on the board the other day, and why can't this team force turnovers? And I'm like, this is what we just said is exactly the reason why. when you're constantly a step behind because you're unsure of what you're doing, you're not playing full speed, or you're like, well, I'm not sure if I should drive on this ball because I'm not quite sure what's behind me or what's in front of me or what's beside me, or if this is even what I'm supposed to do, then you're going to constantly be a step late to the football, right? And that's the thing is number one, the Notre Dame defensive line does a really poor job of getting their hands up. They were much better about this under Mike Elson. Now Washington has got to get them back to being that. You've got too many tall kids on the perimeter not to have any batted balls at the line of scrimmage on the season. I mean, you have to get better about that. And then the other part is if you allow your players to say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. Now go do it at a really high level. Then you're going to see more disruption. You'll see more forced fumbles, more batted balls, more breakups, more interceptions. Those are the type of things that you're going to see. So that's what this team needs to do. Now, somebody just asked if Doug Brumfield is playing. He's listed as questionable as of earlier today. We are breaking this down with the thought he will play because he's the guy that is the issue. If Carter Fell plays, this game won't be close, in my opinion. It will be just like the last 2 weeks, and you're not really tested. So we're working with the assumption he's going to play, and that's what the keys are going to be off of. So when I look at it, Ryan, that's kind of a key for me is the being disruptive and being disciplined then leads to more opportunities to get the football. I think that's going to be a big part of it as well. And I'm going to quickly transition to the last one because this is the one that you're going to be most fired up about. This is the one on defense that's of all the points we made. I mean, these are all four, important points, right? Especially number 1 and 3, dominate up front, get the football. Those are going to be important against Syracuse and Clemson and Navy and PC and USC. This one to me is the most big picture specific, but also the area that I'm most concerned about playing UNLV if Doug Brumfield plays, and that's linebacker play. Key 4, you have got to get your linebackers on track, and it's not as simple as just bench this guy and play that guy. It's a problem across the board that needs to get addressed. It's part coaching, part player. They both got to get on the same page and get rolling, and that's going to be a big key to this game, and important not just for the future, Ryan, but again, this is a very important key for this game as well.
Yep. I mean, when you think of, again, we've talked about it a ton. I feel like we haven't talked about even yesterday about how Notre Dame's run defense is going to be against UNLV because you just kind of have an assumption that's not going to be a major issue, right? Like you just have that assumption, even though I do like Aiden Robbins at running back. I think he's a pretty good running back. The fact of the matter is, though, is that UNLV's offensive line just not very good, man. Like the yards that he gets are good, hard earned yardage, like consistently in the running game. But we've talked about making this team one-dimensional. How you do that is shut down the run, which is a linebacker's first and foremost responsibility. Linebackers are run-first football players. Stop the run, make this team one-dimensional. And then after that, I mean, the RPO game, the ability to work off the read game for the quarterback, those are all, again, you're trying to manipulate a second level. I mean, I would argue that if Notre Dame's linebackers ball out this week and play their best game, that this game won't even be close. And UNLV won't have much of a chance to score a ton in this football game because that's on almost every one of their concepts. That is who UNLV is trying to manipulate. They are trying to make linebackers fill the wrong gap, read the wrong key, work inside the box and throw an easy RPO. They're trying to make linebackers wrong all day. And in this football game, the one worry that you do have is that UNLV, or I should say Notre Dame, has not been a good position at a position that UNLV likes to key off of a ton, right? So when you're looking at them against a UNLV team that wants to take advantage of the second level, Notre Dame has to be better in this football game. The linebackers have to come to play. It's not necessarily that they have to be dominating and they have to really, they don't have to have every tackle and have to, a ton of tackle for loss, but they need to play better. They've just been a bad unit so far this year. With how this UNLV offense functions, Brian, again, I think that the linebacker position is going to be so instrumental because almost everything that UNLV does is trying to prove a linebacker wrong. And if you are able to prove them, if you're able to make Doug Brumfield have to second guess or make the running backs have to get extremely tough yardage, then you're going to have a field day, if I'm being completely honest, right? And that's the point blank period to it.
I also think this is a game I don't think the way they've used linebackers on pressures has been overly creative, to be honest with you. I would like to see a little bit more of that this game. I do think this is a game where if Tariq Bracy's back, this is a game I'd like to see them play a little bit more aggressive coverage pre-snap, limit the inside breaking routes, limit the quick game on the perimeter, and bring a few more linebacker fires on first and second down. Now, whether those are run stunts that then run through the quarterback or whether they're actual pressures, I actually think this is a game where I wouldn't mind seeing them maybe early on do something to turn the linebackers loose a little bit in an attempt to try to get them into a rhythm. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to play Maris Liufau, use them on a couple of those pressures early on to try to just get them rolling. You know, and I would do the same. I'll tell you what, the kid that has shown me the best burst so far this year, Ryan, has been Prince Collie. And for me, like, he's a guy that I'm like, okay, I want to see that guy come with a fire at some point in time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so those are the different aspects of it that I want to see as well. I do think allowing them to attack a little bit more where there's no read, just, hey, dude, right now, this is where you're going, I think could also be something that sends them into a little bit better place and gets them a little bit of rhythm. You know, they're like the receivers. Like, they just need some success to get them going. I think it's in there. Look, they know. Do you really think Maris Liufau watches film and is like, man, I played great on Saturday? I don't know what these people are talking about.
I hope not.
I don't think he does. I really don't. Do you think J.D. Bertrand watches film and he's like, dude, I'm way better than I was last year? Do you think Jack Kaiser watches Stanford and is like, man, I dominate? These are smart kids. They know they're capable of playing better. They're frustrated, just like we're all frustrated. So I think if you can do something early to kind of get them going where you maybe design some opportunities for them to make plays within a more refined game plan, I think that could be a key too. And it's a lot like we said about the receivers, Ryan. I really view the linebackers as on the same page as the receivers. It's a unit that is suffering because of poor usage and an unnecessarily complicated scheme, and they happen to play the position where the most thinking is required. Yeah. And I think that's where it's true for both of those units. And if they can fix those two, if all that we get out of this game is that the Notre Dame receivers start playing to their potential and the linebackers start playing their potential, if that's the only two big changes we see and what leads to that, then I'm going to feel a lot better about this football team moving forward, because it will only happen if you make some of the other necessary changes that lead to that. It'll be a very positive thing if those two units start playing better, right? I mean, like, this team is can play with anybody if those two units play better, because they almost beat Ohio State and they beat North Carolina and they beat BYU with both of those units not playing very good football as a whole.
And you have had spurts of the secondary playing really well. You've had spurts of the defensive line playing well, not often enough. But the linebacker group has been easily the most inconsistent on the defensive side of football. Like, it hasn't even been close if we're telling the tale, right? Like, it just has not been a good unit linebacker wise. So I agree 100%, especially on the defensive side of the ball and on the offensive side of the ball. I agree with the wide receiver aspect of it too. But, just talking about the linebacker position, man, like, it has been the one that has just been so maddeningly inconsistent. We saw it for, was it the North Carolina game that it was a little better, right, Brian? Because they were kind of using guys a little bit more simplified, right? Like, they need to get back to that a little bit more.
It's more design stunts, like, because why? Because North Carolina went fast and it forced Notre Dame to do less. They had no choice but to do less against North Carolina, because the tempo from North Carolina did not allow Notre Dame to get the kind of complex calls and different things they wanted in. So to your point, that's not a coincidence that was the case. It's not a coincidence.
No. And linebacker can be such a cerebral position. But again, this is why I go back to your thinking should happen Monday through or Sunday through Friday, right? Like, that's when your thinking should all happen. It should be in between drives. It should be in between quarters. On the field, you just have to go, man. Be instinctual, be proactive, and go. You need to read, because that's the biggest thing right now, Brian, is like, I think that a lot of these guys aren't reading the field really well, and that's making them look slow. Like, we've had a couple people ask, like, is Maris Liufau still injured? And I think the answer is no. Like, I don't think he's slower than he was in 2020 per se. I think his eyes are just causing him to look slow. Like, there's a difference between being slow and looking slow. Like, you've said that before, right? And I think right now the linebackers are not reading well, and they look slow out there because they just are very unsure of what the responsibilities are. Simplify, and let's get them moving faster, right? I think departmentalize and conquer is my biggest thing for the linebacker unit.
Last little piece, Ryan, special teams, same as always. Do no harm, right? Limit mistakes. Don't give them short fields. Don't have mistakes where, you shank a punt or you muff a punt or you miss a kick. Just do your job, right? And I think, Brian, outside of one return against BYU, this special team has been really good, fundamentally sound. Like it's funny how people perceive things. Somebody yesterday said that, Brandon Joseph's been abysmal as a punt returner, to which I pointed out that he ranks 28th in the nation in punt return average. Not being Tom Zibikowski or Rocket Ismail doesn't mean you suck, right? What I want is a guy that's going to help you maximize field position off catching punts, and when opportunities are there, get the most you can get. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a guy that can return some kicks back. That's fine. But Brandon Joseph has been a solid, steady punt returner this year. I think the coverage units outside of one punt return against BYU that was partly outkicking the coverage a little bit. This has been a really good special teams, right? Now, your field goal kickers had a couple misses, but that I don't put that on the special teams coordinator all that much. I didn't even really put those on Brian Polian, except in the times where you saw him. Like, I remember before a game, I think it was Louisville or Northwestern, and it wasn't Brian Van Polian, it was Scott Booker at the time. And I looked over.
Did you say Van Polian?
No, I said Brian Polian. And I looked over at a guy next to me. I was like, this kid's going to suck in this game. And I can't remember which game it was, because the whole time Scott Booker's down there just in his ear, just yapping at him. I'm like, dude, you don't know how to coach kickers. Like, nobody knows how to coach kickers, right? As a position coach, leave that kid alone. He was, and I was just like, back off, man. And of course, the kicker, when I think it was Kyle Brinza, no, it might have been Justin Yoon. I'm trying to remember which year it was. It might have been Justin Yoon, but I'm just like, dude, get out of his ear. Get away from him. Leave him alone. That's how I've always felt about kickers. Unless you have hired someone who is a kicking specialist, which is, I'm surprised more teams don't do. They should. Especially with all the analyst roles, hire more analysts and then hire a GA that's or somebody who's a kicking specialist, that can work with the kid in different, because you can work with kids on outside of practice. An analyst can do anything with a kicker outside of actual practice. He can watch film with them. He can go over stuff in drills and all that. In the film room and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, different topic for a different day. Do your job. Do your job. Yep. That's the key, right? Do your job. Execute, limit mistakes. And if it means you get a blocked punt or a big return, great. That's just an added bonus. But you can't do anything to give UNLV cheap points or take points away from your unit.
Well, Brian, how many times have I said this season, right? Notre Dame needs to play against the opponent, not against themselves. Like, that is like the point blank, man. And that is a very consistent thing across every team. But, especially for Notre Dame, when you are struggling in certain areas, you can't play against yourself, man. Like, you can't be self-inflicted. You can't have bad penalties in dumb spots. You can't have muff punts. You can't have missed field goals. Like, those things you just need to take care of, man. Like, don't shoot yourselves in the foot. You can't drop a ball on 3rd and 4 on an easy crossing route that would have gone for 20-plus yards. Like, you can't do those little things that make things harder on yourself. Like, don't hurt yourself. Help yourself. Like, UNLV is a team that you shouldn't need to be perfect against to beat, obviously. But again, we're preparing for the rest of the season, right? So when you're playing against a Clemson, you can't have self-inflicted things happen to you, right? Against USC, to win that football game potentially, you can't self-inflict and hurt yourself. Like, you need to start playing smarter, more cohesive football. And the first play of last game was a false start where you get yourself in 1st and 15 to start the football game. Like, those things are demoralizing, man. So Notre Dame is not good enough right now to also play against Notre Dame every week. They have to just remove those little stupid mistakes, play smart football, and not shoot themselves in the foot. Because right now they are shooting themselves in the foot way, way too often and putting themselves in some bad positions.
That's going to be it for the Keys to Victory segment of this show. Before we move on to the predictions, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Now it's prediction time, Ryan. We've kind of done the keys to the game, so let's kind of talk about how we see this game playing out and kind of what went into your prediction method. I think you and I had a different prediction method, which is part of the fun. I give you guys very little directive. I just say, give me your score and explain to me how you're going to see it. And it's partly so that you can explain to people like, hey, here's how I came to this prediction. So I'm going to start with you. I'm going to let you to make your prediction of the game, and then I want you to kind of explain how you see the game going out. And then I want you to then I'm going to follow a question on your prediction because I know what your prediction is. So I'm going to let you do that first. Then I will have a follow-up question for you.
Yeah, I picked Notre Dame to win this game 35-13. And Brian, honestly, this is the head outweighing the heart in this one because, I mean, when I look at this team on paper, again, Notre Dame's talent-wise is just a different caliber than this football team. This game should be a 50-something-to-nothing game or 50-something-to-7 game. Like, there's that much difference in talent, in my opinion. But I've come down on expectations on this team as far as doing what they need to do, right? So I'm just 35-13 is me, I think, being a little lukewarm on this game. I think it should still be a decisive victory, which a 22-point win is still decisive, no matter how you cut it against, whatever team you're playing. But I just went with 35 just because I don't know what to expect from the offense. I don't trust it until I see it. We talked about it being a show-me business. I need to see this offense really come out and play to its fullest potential in order for me to feel better about them, right? Like, it needs to happen. So I went 35-13. I think it's a little mild in a prediction, but need to see it before I can fully buy into it, the growth that's happening.
So, Ryan, you were not alone in your 35-13. Vince also predicted 35-13. Sean Davis predicted 30-3. Andrew McDonough predicted 31-13. And Sean Stiers predicted 32-17. And the thought, I mean, if you read, you can see the predictions for the entire staff at irishbreakdown.com. So you can check that out. It's also on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you are a member, we have some conversation there about that as well. You all are coming at it from the same exact standpoint, and it's completely right. This team's got to show me something first. Like, why should I have faith that this team is going to go out and play to their potential and dominate this opponent? My prediction was, and I'll get into that next, my prediction was based off this is what should happen. What I want to ask you, Ryan, is if Notre Dame does 3 of the 4 keys in here and the special teams plays clean, what should the game look like? What is Notre Dame capable? And I don't mean like they play the perfect game and win 59-0. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about if Notre Dame just kind of plays their game and UNLV is going to do their thing. It's both teams play sort of their game. What should the game look like then if we're in a situation where Notre Dame plays to its potential as a football team? That's what I'm curious about. How you see it in that regard.
Sure. When I say it's a mild prediction, I think it's mild from the offensive perspective, right? Because I think that Notre Dame has the firepower to score. It's just the offense has just been so up and down that it's hard to kind of buy into a little bit. So to answer your question, if there's some answers that happen offensively, like let's say 3 out of 4 of the keys work in the right direction for Notre Dame, then I think you could add at least 2 touchdowns to the total. I mean, I think that it could be a 49-13 game, maybe 52-13 game. Like, I think that either way, I expect the defense to have a good showing because, again, Doug Brumfield coming off injury. We'll see if he's limited, if he plays, all that good stuff. But I think that Notre Dame has the horses to limit this running game and make things difficult for UNLV. Now, I think they'll score a little bit just because I do think that they have some good skill talent on this team. But I think to answer your question, Brian, the biggest thing for me is that I think I'm being very mild with my score prediction from the offensive side of the football if Notre Dame does click at a higher rate. So I think that it could be 40-something-13. I think it could hover around 50-13. If Notre Dame puts it together, it's just I haven't seen it enough to be confident in that assumption right now.
Yes, completely understand that. That makes total sense. I like what John Klimek says. 45-9 pissed off head coach Freeman is what I want to see. So if I look at it from the standpoint of what you guys said, I think your prediction of 35-13 and some combination of that or what Sean Stiers had at 32-17, some kind of 35-20, 35-17 game is there. If Notre Dame just lays an egg and plays like they did against Stanford, UNLV is capable of beating them. I mean, let's be honest. You lost to Marshall and Stanford, you can lose to UNLV, right? That's the reality of the situation. So I think 30-17, 35-20 is kind of the range if we see just kind of Notre Dame do what they've done most of the season. My prediction went a little bit of a different direction, Ryan, and I kind of went more of a this is what should happen type of thing. and I went Notre Dame 49-17. And my prediction is based off, like I said, this is kind of what a should, and I explained it in my breakdown. I mean, like I said, I'm going back to, and this is how I used to make predictions. This year I tried to be more about like, this is what I think will happen. And this team is just too hard to read. The funny thing is, like, and reading through every single one of like Vince's first sentence in his breakdown, his prediction is, who is this team? I mean, really, who is Notre Dame in 2022? And you talked about that as well, Ryan. I mean, your final statement is this game is more about Notre Dame versus Notre Dame than the matchup against UNLV. It's you're fighting against yourself in this game. And so I went with what should happen. And I'm even taking into account that they're going to do some of the scan stuff. I even took that into account. You know, like, I don't expect them to just push the tempo. But, you know, if they come out and they dominate the line of scrimmage, they get the receivers involved in the game plan, the defense plays to its potential, I think this is a game that could be a 49-7 type of game, is where it should be. You know, because you are. I mean, we've seen this offense capable of it. We saw it against North Carolina. You know, if they play against UNLV the way they did against North Carolina and even BYU, they're a 40-plus point team against UNLV. And that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it. I'm not even talking about max out. They do all the keys that we do. If they do all the keys that we do, Ryan, this should be a 50-something to teens type of game, in my opinion. But I don't anticipate them doing all those things, right? And so I'm going 49-17. Part of that also is I do think they get a defensive score in this game. I do think we're going to see something like that where we get some kind of defensive or special team score. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a direct one. It could be like a blocked punt that gets recovered at the 8, or a fumble or an interception that gets the ball back inside the 20. I count that as kind of a defensive touchdown, meaning the defense sets you up. That's what I'm referring to it as, a defensive touchdown, not a direct pick six or fumble recovery, but more of there's a touchdown that's going to be they forced a fumble and recovered it at the 8, and the offense punched it in a couple plays later. That's where I'm coming from on that. So my prediction was 49-17. So we all predicted Notre Dame win. Very wide range of scores there. We even have a lot of wide range of scores from fans. So, I mean, you're seeing a lot of this stuff. I mean, you know, that's where we're at. So again, I think some people aren't hearing something that I said. I'm predicting what should happen, not what will happen, or what is based off what this team has done. Okay, so hear that before you freak out and put 75 exclamation marks after my score. Very clear. I'm going a different method. It's what should happen. Will it happen? I have no clue. And that's why I'm going back to doing it this way, because I have no clue what this football team is going to do. None. But what I do know is I know what Notre Dame's roster looks like. I know what UNLV's roster looks like. I know that they just lost 40-7 to San Jose State and 42-7 to Air Force. Okay, so this is what should happen. And again, 49-17 is not, they've arrived, because the top 10 teams in the country could beat them worse than 49-7. This is what should happen if they're just playing to the best of who this particular team is, not who I think this team can be. That's a different prediction, Ryan. That's a whole different prediction, in my opinion. So that's where I'm at for this game. So that's what people need to understand about where my prediction comes from. It's what should happen, not what I think will happen. So that's where I'm at with that. So we have a lot more predictions here for different people. I want to kind of get as many people in there as possible. So that's going to do it for our predictions of Notre Dame. We are going to jump into our previews and predictions for the biggest games this weekend. But before we do, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, and of course, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Ryan, this is an interesting weekend. We've had some great weekends of college football, and this weekend is very interesting because, like last weekend, we talked about how there was a lot of big games, but then a lot of like really interesting games after that. You know, you talked about like the Duke North Carolina game. Not a lot of people were talking about that game. You and I were very intrigued by that game and what it meant, and we went out and saw. It was a great game. I mean, I think Duke won, or North Carolina won, 38-35. I'm looking for the final now. The Michigan State-Wisconsin game was very intriguing. Purdue-Nebraska was a very interesting game. You know, Oregon State picked up a really sneaky good victory last week, beating Washington State to get them back on track. They're now up to 5-2. Fresno State had a great upset over San Jose State last week. There were just a lot of really quality games outside of LSU. Florida was a very interesting game. Washington, Arizona, just a lot of really intriguing matchups on top of the huge games that we saw last weekend. This week's a little different because at the top, there's some really great games this weekend. After that, not a lot of games that really interest us a whole lot. So we're going to stick to just really 6 games that really interest us this week, Ryan. And I'm going to start with a game that matters most to Notre Dame, and that is on Saturday at noon on ABC is number 5 Clemson at number 14 Syracuse. This is a fascinating matchup. 14-point underdog is what Syracuse is, but here's the crazy thing. Is there a team in the ACC, since Dino Babers arrived, has there been a team in the ACC that has played Clemson consistently as tough as Syracuse? Now, you look at the scores and you say, okay, well, some of those games were blowouts, but like even the game in, what was it? I'm trying to look it up here. I think it was 2019 where it was a game where Clemson ended up winning 47-21. But if you go back, it was 19 is what, no, it was 20. It was the 20 season, Ryan, is when it happened. They won 47-21. But if you remember that game, Syracuse was winning in the third quarter of that game. Clemson piled on late. Syracuse beat Clemson in 2017. It was if you remember that game, they knocked Kelly Bryant out of the game. They couldn't play. They came back and won. The next year, Syracuse had a big lead on Clemson. Chase Bryce comes off the bench. It was Trevor Lawrence's first start, leads them to a last-second victory. Yet another great game. 2019 was a blowout. 2020 ends up being a blowout, a 26-point blowout. But again, Syracuse had a lead in the second half of that game. And then last year's game was 17-14. There has not been a team that has played Clemson as tough as Syracuse, no matter how bad they are. The 2018 team that almost beats Clemson was a 10-3 team. But the 17 team that actually beat Clemson, who was the number 1 seed in the playoff that year, was 4-8. Like, it just doesn't matter how bad Syracuse is. They play Clemson tough more often than not. Now you have them where they're both really good again, and I think it creates a very fascinating matchup, Ryan. So I just wanted to set the stage, first of all, just to kind of lay out, like, boy, this is a really intriguing matchup. And who would have thought coming into the season that this is always a game to watch for Clemson because of how well they've played them since Dino showed up or Coach Baber showed up. But now it's for Atlantic supremacy because these are the 2 undefeated teams in the Atlantic Division. The winner of this battle kind of supplants himself or puts themselves on top of the Atlantic and says, now you have to do something. Now we have to lose twice. Because we beat Syracuse, they beat NC State. They've now beat head-to-head all the teams that could potentially beat them. So now you better hope we lose twice. Same thing for Syracuse. So this is a really fascinating game, Ryan, and not one that I would have predicted before the season that we'd be talking about as a huge battle between arguably the 2 best teams in the ACC this year.
Well, I was going to say, raise your hand if you had Syracuse being undefeated playing against Clemson on your bingo card. Like, no one had it, man. Like, no one had it. Like, let's be honest. I thought, you remember in the preseason, Brian, I was like, I think Syracuse could be like a sneaky team, but like, I didn't think they'd be undefeated at this point, right? Like, I don't think anybody predicted that one. But to your point, Syracuse has pretty regularly given Clemson some interesting football games, man. They have. So I have in my prediction, I had it 31-16. Clemson comes out on top, but I do think that this is one where Syracuse is keeping it close for a long time. And then in the fourth quarter, there's kind of like a little bit of a separation that happens, you know, like maybe it's 23 or 24-16 and like the, 10 minutes left in the fourth. And then a touchdown kind of pulls it away. And I think the biggest difference in this game is Clemson's secondary has been underwhelming this year for the most part, right? There's been some teams that have been able to throw the football on them, especially Wake Forest. But I don't think that Syracuse, even though Garrett Schrader's playing better football than he ever has on the college level, I just don't think he's a consistent enough passer where he's going to be able to put up huge numbers. Like, I like Arondé Gadsden Jr., but I just don't think offensively from a passing perspective, Syracuse is quite good enough. And I think that what Syracuse does well kind of goes right into where Clemson wins, like they then want to run the football. Sean Tucker wants to get downhill. Garrett Schrader wants to keep stuff off a read zone and power read. Like that's their formula for success. And what Clemson has is a stout front four that's deep, couple good backups in that rotation as well. And they have some dudes at linebacker, man. I mean, Trent Simpson, I know he's been a little banged up, but even without him, Barrett Carter is a really good football player. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. just had 13 tackles last week for Clemson. So they have a really nice second level, and they have a deep defensive line. So I think this kind of plays into their favor a little bit when you're Clemson. I think that their biggest strength defensively can kind of take or at least limit some of what Syracuse does really well. So I think it's 31-16. Clemson, Syracuse hangs tough, but Clemson's talent ultimately wins out in the end.
That's where I'm at too, Ryan. I think the matchup for Syracuse is not good because the thing is Syracuse, what we thought they were going to be really good at this year was running the football. And they've been good at running the football, but not great at running the football this season. Sean Tucker's down almost a full yard per carry less. He's averaging 107 yards per game. He's 124 last year. Garrett Schrader's still a good runner, but he's down yards per carry from where he was last year. He's not on the same track he is from a yard standpoint. Close, but they just haven't been as big play as they were last year, which surprises me because they've been so much better throwing the football this year. But the big thing for me for Syracuse is they've been winning with defense and ball control. And I don't think that's not the recipe to me to beat Clemson. Not for them. And you look at their offense, I mean, they're averaging, I mean, their points per game looks good, right? 36 points per game. It's very inflated. They scored 48 points against a UConn team that's just not good. I mean, UConn's not good on defense. And then they scored 59 points against Wagner, an FCS team. They scored 24 points against NC State last week. They only scored 22 against Virginia. They did score 32 against Purdue, and most of that came in the fourth quarter. And then they beat Louisville 31-7. But their last two scoring drives that game, Ryan, covered a combined 38 yards for 2 touchdowns. That was their defense making plays to give them short fields to put that game away. It wasn't like they went out and dominated at the line of scrimmage and went out and just put 31 points on Louisville. That wasn't the case. I mean, they didn't do that. Now, they've been much more balanced this year, but they've been really inconsistent running the football. I mean, they had 208 against Louisville and then 388 against Wagner, but they were 156 on the ground against UConn, only 125 against Purdue. It's got a pretty good run defense this year. 75 against Virginia. They had a good week last week against NC State for 179, and they were able to do the ball control thing. But NC State's offense was just crippled last week. You take Devin Leary off that team, and they're not good. They're a maybe 500 football team. I mean, that's how I feel about NC State right now.
Yep.
So I just don't think the matchup is there. I'm with you. I think it's going to be a close competitive game for at least a while, but I think Clemson just has too many athletes on offense. I think they'll make some big plays. I think they'll be able to wear Syracuse down a little bit. Clemson's not a great running team either. And this isn't the Clemson of the past. So I don't know if I think they can blow them out. I mean, the only game where I was really impressed by the Clemson offense was against Wake Forest, whose defense is not very good. So I think at the end of the day, Clemson will grind it out, but I do think this is going to be a good football game. I do. So that's where I'm at for this game. Second game we're going to talk about is a very interesting game, Ryan, and I was surprised at how our staff made picks. So we made predictions for the Syracuse Clemson game. We also made predictions for the Ole Miss LSU game. And I had a different pick than everyone else on the staff, and it's one of those times where I hope you are all right. That is number 7 Ole Miss at LSU. It is a 3:30 game on CBS. LSU is a 1-point favorite. That line changed a lot when I was doing this last night. So, I wrote this article after midnight last night is when I finished up this article, and I went to check the spread, and the spread was LSU was a 2.5-point favorite. It changed 1.5 points since last night. It's now down to 1. So obviously there's some money moving on those sides. This is a fascinating matchup too, Ryan, because you have two teams that you just don't know what you're going to expect from them week after week. There are some weeks when Ole Miss looks like, okay, this is a potential contender for the West Crown. And then other weeks you're like, they gave up that many yards to Auburn? Seriously? I have had such a hard time figuring out this Mississippi team this year, Ryan. I mean, as I talked about in my breakdown, it's like, 1 week they're looking great and they're shutting people down. And then the next week they can't stop anybody. I mean, they got ripped up by AJ Swan. You know, like he
Hey,
shredded
I
them in
like
the past
I
game.
like AJ Swan. By the
I
way, I
get
like
that, but
AJ
he's the
Swan. I'm just
quarterback at
kidding.
Vanderbilt. He's a true freshman,
Yeah.
right? Now he was a good
Yep.
player. I think he was
He
committed
is
to
a good
Maryland
player.
for a while. But you
Yeah.
shouldn't get ripped up by AJ Swan. And then the next week you go out and you play Auburn, who has struggled to move the football really all year, and
Yep.
you give up 301 rushing yards. I mean, the only other team that they've had more than 122 rushing yards against this year was Tulsa. That's it. They only rushed for 102 yards on 40 carries against Central Arkansas. They went for 50. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Auburn's rush defense. That was the weird thing about it. I'm looking at Auburn's rush offense. Same principle. They went for 285 against Mercer, 210 against San Jose State. Then they're 119 against Penn State, 82 for 45 carries against Missouri, 101 on 31 carries against LSU, 92 yards on 25 carries against Georgia, and then 301 yards on 48 carries against Ole Miss. And it's just like, but then you look at Ole Miss's defense, and you're like, well, where the heck did that come from? Because the numbers I was giving a second ago were what they've given up on the ground. They gave up 262 yards rushing to Tulsa and 301 to Auburn. But then they held Troy to 60, Central Arkansas to 102, Georgia Tech to 53, Kentucky to 108, and Vanderbilt to 122. So it's like, which Ole Miss team's going to show up? I have no clue.
Yeah.
And LSU's the same. They're schizophrenic, Ryan. Their offense looked anemic in beating Auburn and Tennessee. Then they come out last week against Florida, and their offense looks like, dude, if their offense plays like this the rest of the year, they can play with anybody on their schedule. But you just have no clue who they're going to be. So, it made predicting this game really tough, Ryan, because I just don't know which of these two teams, which two versions of these football teams is going to show up. And I hope the one that you guys think is going to show up is the one that shows up. So I'm going to get your prediction, Ryan, and then kind of how you see this game playing out a little bit.
Ole Miss is a really weird defense, to your point, Brian. And I talked about this a little bit and just kind of my opinion on it. I mean, they have some guys up front, man. Like they have Cedric Johnson and Jared Ivey at defensive end. Tavius Robinson's another defensive lineman they have that's really talented. They have Shaheem Battle at not Shaheem Battle, the other AJ Finley in the defensive backfield for Ole Miss. It's all really talented football players, man. I think all future NFL players, and at times their defense has looked way improved than it was last year, and then other times it's just kind of been really up and down. So that's the reasoning for my pick, is that I do think LSU is going to be able to score a little bit. I mean, I think you saw some really good moments out of Jaden Daniels last week. I think they finally started getting Keyshawn Boutte involved in the offense. So the passing attack in LSU is working a lot better. But I think that the one thing that you can count on for Ole Miss is going to score some points in this football game, in my opinion, because Lane Kiffin is a really good offensive coach. You have Jackson Dart, who's been a little bit inconsistent, but he's really done a nice job in the running game on top of some of the passing numbers that he's put up. You have a good wide receiver out there in Jonathan Mingo. The two-headed running back, Quishon Jenkins and Zach Evans, has been a really good running back tandem for them. So I think ultimately this is a higher scoring game than maybe some people anticipate, but I have Ole Miss coming out 41-30 because I just think they're a little bit more of an explosive offense. They've been a little bit more consistent offensively than LSU has. And I think that, it's a high scoring game because I think Ole Miss has the dogs to kind of hold this LSU team down a little bit, but their defense has just been too inconsistent to give it any lower of a score than I went. So 41-30 Ole Miss. And the last question I have for you, Brian, is what is Ole Miss ranked coming into this game? You're on mute, but I will answer for you. It is number 7. Yes.
Sorry.
They're ranked 7th.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. They're ranked 7th, which means Brian Kelly is facing a top 10 team. So all I have to say is hotty toddy, baby.
That's kind of the thing, is that's the other part, is like LSU just didn't even show up to play against Tennessee. Are they going to show up to play against Ole Miss? I have no idea. I went LSU 31-27 simply because I don't have a lot of faith that Ole Miss is going to be able to shut down the just the way they've played the last 2 games. It'd be one thing if they just had an off week against Auburn, it'd be different. But it was 2 games in a row where our defense really struggled, and that's kind of my concern. And so it really was more about just going with the home team. If it was at Ole Miss, I'd predict Ole Miss to win more convincingly than just 31-27. Here's the key for me for Ole Miss, Ryan, is it's the pass rush. Their pass rush has been very inconsistent. There are games where they look really good. I mean, they ate Georgia Tech up. Now, Georgia Tech's offensive line stinks, and they give up a lot of pass rush, which we saw last night against Virginia. when Jeff Sims went out with an injury, and that kid by the end of the game did you see him just kind of fall down at his own 2-yard line on that late drive? Yeah, it was like they got the ball back down 16-9 with like 4 minutes left, and on third down, there was like a pressure, and he just literally just like fell down. He just like went to fetal position. It was
that was the backup, Zach Gibson,
the backup,
whatever his name is.
Yeah, he's not good. He is not good, and so it was really bad. But I don't know. That's the key for me. Ole Miss is going to have to pressure Jaden Daniels. When teams have been able to get pressure on Jaden Daniels, it throws you off.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't move the ball. They can't score. Tennessee did a great job of that, and I'm hoping that Ole Miss can do that. Because look, I be honest with you, I want Ole Miss to win this game. I do.
Yes.
Everybody knows my feelings on this. I'm not going to hide my feelings on this one. I don't want to see Brian Kelly win this game because I don't like the guy. But if I'm looking at it from an analyst standpoint, it's the same reason I was the only person to pick LSU to beat Florida last week, because just the matchup isn't ideal. So if the Ole Miss defense comes to play, Ryan, this game will be over.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, all right, drunk is gone. So I'm tired of it. So anyway, Ryan, that's kind of how I see it playing out. If Ole Miss's defense can come to play, then I think they can not only win this game, but win this game where they're clearly the better team for 60 minutes. I just don't know what version of them is going to show up. And since LSU is the home team, I'm going with the LSU defense or offense to make enough plays and their defense to make enough stops. So I really hope I'm wrong on this one at this point.
LSU is a tough place to play, so I get it, man. I totally get that.
Didn't look that tough for Tennessee, but Ole Miss isn't Tennessee
traditionally
as of right now. Right now, the rest of the staff, Vince picked Ole Miss to win 41-34. Sean Davis picked Ole Miss to win 30-27. Andrew McDonough picked Ole Miss to win 33-26, and Sean Stiers picked them to win 30-26. So this is definitely one of those games, Ryan. I would love to see all of you gain a game on me in the standings. I would love that to happen actually this week, because I would like to see that happen.
This is the week that my comeback works, baby. This is the week.
There you go. I'm all for it. I am all for it. I'm all for it. I'll let that one play. Another big 3:30 game, Ryan, is number 9 UCLA at number 10 Oregon. Also 3:30, as I said, will be on Fox. Oregon is a 6.5-point favorite. UCLA has been a surprise to a lot of people. I mean, you've known this. I've been higher on UCLA than a lot of people, but it's kind of like what you said about Syracuse. I don't know if I predicted them to be. I didn't see them being 6-0 right now, though. Right? I didn't see them being undefeated coming into this game. Actually, are they 6-0 or are they 7-0? I think they're 6-0. Correct? Am I correct on that? I think I'm right on that one. Right. Let me go So let's see. UCLA, and there's so many good 3:30 games on. Yes, they're 6-0. Oregon's 5-1. Oregon got blown out in the opener by Georgia, and they've looked really good ever since. So this is a game, Ryan, between two really hot teams in the Pac-12. UCLA continues to just go out there and not only win, but this year when UCLA has played in big games, Ryan, they're not only winning, they're winning convincingly. I mean, the most competitive game they've had all year so far was against South Alabama. I mean, they're smacking people. I mean, they beat Washington 40-32. Washington scored the last 2 touchdowns of that game. It was not competitive. They beat Colorado 45-17. They beat Utah 42-32 in a game that, again, they controlled that game from start to finish. Oregon has been that way with one exception. They had to come way from behind to beat Washington State. That was a great comeback. But outside of that, they have also dominated the teams they've played. So this is 2 red-hot Pac-12 teams, 2 Pac-12 teams that are looking for to remain the king of the hill. They're both undefeated in the conference. Remember, Pac-12 got rid of divisions last year. So there's a chance. So unlike the Syracuse Clemson game where the loser could be on the outside looking in for the ACC title game, this could set up a potential rematch moving forward. But now the team that loses gets on a very thin margin for error, Ryan, because there are a lot of teams at the top of the Pac-12 that have a chance to battle. You've got Oregon and UCLA are both 3-0. USC is 4-1. Utah's 3-1. And so there's a lot of games that are going to play against each other. Utah, I mean, even Washington and Oregon State, who are both 2-2, are right there ready to pounce and upset a team ahead of them in order to try to get into that. So the loser all of a sudden falls behind and now is in a battle. The winner puts themselves up as our margin for error is wider as you look to create a chance to get into the Pac-12 title game. This is also, Ryan, a road game for UCLA. The only time they've gone on the road so far this year was against Colorado. They have played a lot of home games. So that adds to it as well. So Oregon, number 10, hosts number 9 UCLA. Ryan Roberts, how do you see this game playing out?
It's a really interesting one, Brian, because I'm excited that UCLA has really gotten back to prominence here, right? Like they've turned it. This is their best season that they've had in a long time right now. And Chip Kelly, a lot of doubters have been around kind of that higher and into, year, 4 now for him, but he's done a tremendous job, obviously, working to this point. And it's a great story because this is a little bit of a redemption story at quarterback. You've seen Dorian Thompson-Robinson on the side of UCLA be extremely up and down through his entire career, playing by far his best football this year. You have on the other side Bo Nix, who has a terrible game against Georgia, but to your point, has been a very good player since that bad outing against Georgia. So this one hurts me because my feelings about Bo Nix, but I picked Oregon to come out on top in this one, man. 34-31. It's not really the difference between the quarterbacks, because I think both of them are going to be able to score some points. On both sides, there's a lot of talent. Oregon has some nice wide receivers that have done some good things this year. UCLA has guys like Shaq Charbonnet, who's been a really talented football player for them. Jake Bobo, who's been fantastic since transferred over from Duke. I think the difference is that we're going to see a little bit of a high-scoring game, but I think Oregon's defense is going to make a deciding play in this football game. So I think Oregon's defense just has a couple more players on it that I think are a little more of difference makers than what UCLA has. So I think Oregon's going to have a big play defensively to kind of take the full momentum of this game in the last couple minutes. And I think Oregon comes out on top in a big victory, 34-31 over UCLA.
I would love to see UCLA win this game. I would. If as a fan, I'm watching this game, I'm rooting for UCLA to win the game. But when I break it down, Ryan, I have Oregon winning for a number of reasons. Number one, I think they just have a little bit more firepower. I actually think UCLA has the better overall defense, but I think that I think Oregon matches up a little bit better, I think, against UCLA's offense than I think they do. Look, even against Georgia didn't run the ball effectively against Oregon. Oregon's rush defense this year, they gave up 132 to Georgia, 100 to Eastern Washington, 61 against BYU, 53 against Washington State. They held Stanford to 127, and then they gave up 115 against Arizona last week. So they haven't really struggled against the run. Now, having said that, none of the teams that they've played this year, with all due respect to Georgia, are anywhere close to being as good running the football as UCLA is. They just haven't. Georgia's rushing offense is kind of dominated against bad teams. They haven't really looked great running the ball this year. They're not like they were in the past. But that was, the team that held them to the lowest rushing yards this year was Samford. But I don't feel like they've been tested. So that's kind of a little bit of the unknown that I have. But to your point, I think that Oregon's defense has a chance to make more plays. I think UCLA's defense has been playing more consistently in recent weeks, but I just don't know if they have the perimeter speed to win this game. The reason that I thought that they could beat Utah last week is because I thought they could control the trenches, and they did. This game, to me, is more like the Washington game in that how will UCLA's speed handle the receivers? The difference is, though, Oregon can not only hurt you with their speed on the perimeter throwing the football, but also running the football. And so that's kind of where it comes down to it for me. I think that balanced attack that Oregon brings to the table, I think that's something that's really helped Bo Nix, is they're not asking him to do a million different things, run when you have the opportunity, but we're not going to necessarily run you a bunch. The read zone stuff helps take that pressure off of them. They're not asking him to run a million complex schemes. They're putting him in good positions, and he's thrived so far. Same thing with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He's just a better decision maker now, Ryan. And to your point, there were games in the past where Dorian Thompson-Robinson would look like, man, okay, now I see why he was a top 100 recruit. And then other games, you're like, dude, this dude shouldn't even be there. And so when you look at it, it's just one of those things, Ryan, where I just think I'm going with the home quarterback and the home defense is really what it boils down to. So I'm going UCLA 34, Oregon 34, UCLA 28. I don't think it's going to be as high scoring as you think it's going to be. The interesting thing is you and I could either pull away from the rest of our staff or fall behind because we were the only two to pick Oregon. Vince picked UCLA to win 27-24. This article will be up later this afternoon. This is the only game that we made predictions for. We haven't published yet. Sean Davis predicted UCLA to win 31-23. Andrew McDonough predicted UCLA to win 41-37. And Sean Stiers is expecting a really big-time shootout of UCLA winning 45-42. Wow. So that is the look at that game. I just hope it's a good game. I think it really will. I don't see either team get blown out. I think these two football teams are playing really, really well. I'm just going with the home team on this one. But I'm not going to lie. I'll be rooting for UCLA. I think it'll be a good game. But I'm rooting for if I had to pick a team I want to win, I want UCLA to win. I think it's a cooler story, to be honest with you. That's kind of where I'm at, but I am predicting Oregon to win this football game. All right, so, Ryan, let's get to our next game. This is the last game that we predicted publicly, and that is number 20. There's two huge games in the Big 12 this weekend. Number 20, Texas at number 11, Oklahoma State. 3:30 kickoff on ABC. Texas is a 6-point favorite on the road over the higher-ranked team, Ryan. Oklahoma State is coming off of a game, and let's see, it was they were up 24-7 at one point in time, and they were up 27-13 at another point in time, and lost in overtime to TCU. TCU came back and won that game. Oklahoma State, really should have won that game, and you got to wonder how they're going to handle it, right? How are they going to bounce back from it, Ryan? That's the big question mark. And then you look at Texas. Texas is 5-2. They're in a position where they're still in contention for the Big 12 crown because one of their two losses was out of conference. Here's the other interesting thing about this, Ryan. Texas is a completely different looking team when Quinn Ewers is a quarterback. The Texas Tech loss to me does not happen if Quinn Ewers is not injured for that game. So, but here's the thing I like about Texas. There's two ways to look at it. Their win over Iowa State last week was ugly and sloppy, but I'm actually happy that it was because that's the kind of game Texas showed that they could not win last year. That ugly, low-scoring game, and they hadn't proven to me that they could win it this year. Lost Alabama in similar fashion. You lost to Texas Tech in similar fashion. You showed me you can blow people out. You haven't shown me you can put that team away in the fourth quarter. They did that against Iowa State. So who emotionally comes into this game most focused? Oklahoma State. How do they handle the loss to TCU? Where's Texas at mentally after a couple big wins? It's going to be a really big game, and it's a game that puts the winner right there because after this weekend, Ryan, there's only going to be one Big 12 team left undefeated, and we'll talk about Kansas State and TCU are both undefeated. They play each other. We'll talk about that later. But now you only have one undefeated team left. And then you're in a situation where Texas and Oklahoma State are the only two other teams with only one loss. So the loser of this game gets put in a really tough spot to where it's going to be much tougher to get into the Big 12 title game. For the loser, the winner positions themselves to really be right there going to the end. So big game in Stillwater. How do you see the game playing out, Ryan? And what is your prediction for the final score?
Yeah, for this one, it's a really interesting game, Brian, because I've been a supporter of Oklahoma State. Like I thought that they were going to have a good football team, obviously, and they almost continued their undefeated streak last week against TCU. But you've seen, I think, Spencer Sanders take a nice step with that program. It could be a very more consistent version of himself this year. But Texas, I agree with you. I think that this was the biggest difference in the football game for me is that Quinn Ewers has been a completely game changer for this program. When he plays, this offense just looks so much different than what it has during the course of the year. So I think that for me, the difference is going to be at the quarterback position. I think Spencer's going to make some plays, which is why I have a little bit of a higher scoring game. But I think ultimately Quinn Ewers is going to be the difference in this football game. So I have it 37-35. Texas wins in a shootout. He's just a little bit better than Spencer Sanders in this game.
And this is one of those games, Ryan, where there's two games this week where I'm different than everybody else on staff. And this is one of those. The other one, I hope I'm wrong. This one, I really don't care either way. I like both of these teams. I like what Steve Sarkisian's doing at Texas. I've always enjoyed what Mike Gundy has done at Oklahoma State. But to me, here's kind of here. It's just there. I still don't know a lot about these teams. We haven't seen Oklahoma State really get tested a ton. They looked really good for half the game last week. Texas is like, are they the team that blew out Oklahoma, or are they the team that barely beat Iowa State? I really don't know. Here's kind of the way I look at it. Neither of these teams play any defense. I think Texas is the more balanced team. To me, they are a better running and throwing combination. I think Oklahoma State, to me, they're a little bit more explosive, or at least they have been for much of the year, a little bit more consistent offensively. When they've lost, they lost by scoring, where when Texas lost, they lost by not scoring and not being able to move the ball. Now, granted, in both of those losses, Quinn Ewers wasn't there at the end of the game. He obviously didn't play at all against Texas Tech, and he got knocked out against Alabama, but they only scored 10 points up at that point in time. It's not like they were just like – it's not like Colt McCoy where they just like went up and down the field the 2 drives Colt McCoy was in the game back in 2009. So Texas is still a little bit of an unknown to me in this matchup. I also, when you look at Texas's big wins this year, they were at home, obviously. So I still don't know if Texas is – I think – here's the thing. Texas has to prove to me they can go on the road. So like the win over Oklahoma, neutral field – beat West Virginia at home, beat UTSA at home, beat Louisiana Monroe at home, beat Iowa State at home. The only road game they've played this year was at Texas Tech, and they lost, right? So I think they would have played better with Quinn Ewers, but we've never seen Quinn Ewers go on the road. Now, he played in Dallas against Oklahoma, but that's a 50-50 crowd. It's not that far away from where you are in Austin. Different kind of animal than going on the road and playing at Stillwater, which is a pretty loud environment. So that, to me, is going to factor in. I think Spencer Sanders' experience in these type of situations is going to win the day against Quinn Ewers' talent. But really, this is the first hostile. This is the first hostile crowd he's going to play in front of. Let's be honest about that, right? Now, the question is how does he handle it? That's the unknown. That's going to be the unknown. So yeah. I picked Oklahoma State in this game. I had a very similar score to the rest of you. I went Oklahoma State 38-31. You said you had Texas 37-35. So just flip a score, basically, right? And add one more touchdown to Texas Tech, or Texas take away a field goal for me. Vince had Texas winning 34-27. Sean Davis had Texas winning 41-35. Andrew McDonough has Texas winning 38-35. And Sean Stiers has them winning 35-28. So we all see this being a relatively entertaining game, like not high scoring, like, 50 to something to 50 something like Texas Oklahoma last year, but a game where offenses are going to carry the day. And it's going to really come down to whose defense can make stops in the fourth quarter. I think that's the one thing we can agree on for sure, Ryan, is the winner of this game will be the team whose defenses make stops in the second half. That's where I think this game gets decided, which is why I'm going with them. And that's really where I'm at, Ryan, with this game, with the Oregon game, and with the LSU Ole Miss game. Is I'm just kind of leaning towards the home teams winning the day. So kind of taking that was the deciding factor in what otherwise were really close matchups for me. And that's why I took Oklahoma State in this game as well. So we got 2 more games we want to talk about, Ryan. I'll stay in the Big 12 for the next one. And that is going to be number 17 Kansas State and number 8 TCU, 8 o'clock on Fox Sports 1. TCU is a 3.5 home favorite in this game. Ryan, again, who had TCU and Kansas State as the last 2 teams standing in the Big 12 as far as undefeated teams? Raise your hand if you did. Put your hand down. You're lying. You did not have that, okay? So that's the reality of it. But that's where they are. And it's funny, Kansas State's not undefeated on the season. They're only undefeated in the Big 12 because they lost to Tulane, right? Which you're like, oh, man, Kansas State's going to struggle. Man, I really thought this was the year that Chris Kleiman – because I came into the year thinking, like, I really think Chris Kleiman has a chance to – like, he's now got, like, full recruiting classes. Now this is his team. I think he's a good coach. I just was really expecting him to get this team turned around, Ryan. And then you come out early in the year, you beat Missouri, blow Missouri out. You have a good win over a decent South Dakota team, which is a good FCS team, and then you lose at home to Tulane. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go again. Next week, you go on the road. You have a convincing win over Oklahoma. You beat Texas Tech. That showed me something. They didn't allow the emotional nature of the win over Oklahoma get them off their game. They go out and beat a really game Texas Tech team, and then they go out on the 8th, 2 weeks ago, and win a really ugly, low-scoring game at Iowa State. They have not looked great the last 2 games, but they're getting the job done. They had a bye week to kind of reorganize. Now they have to go down to Fort Worth and play TCU, who right now, Ryan, is one of the hottest teams in college football. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They have won, obviously, 6 straight games to start the season. They blasted Oklahoma. They beat Kansas on the road, which is a very good win, and they beat Oklahoma State. To me, there's no question that TCU is the more tested team. Now, the question, however, is, are they going to kind of finally hit that wall where they've had so many battles week after week after week? Now Kansas State is coming off of a bye week. They're going to be fresh. They're going to be rested. So there's that dichotomy too. But I think no matter what, Ryan, I have a feeling this is going to be a really good football game. How do you see it playing out, and what is your prediction for this game?
Yeah, I think that it is agreed that it's going to be a very good football game. And I think the thing about TCU, Brian, is I think last week was huge for this team because for the most part, they've just been handling teams for the majority of this year. Like they've been blowing some teams out. They've been winning convincing games. They've been scoring a lot of points. And last week they had to show some resilience against Oklahoma State because Oklahoma State went up early and they kind of controlled that football game. And the TCU had to kind of reverse that momentum and fight back to get a big victory, obviously, against Oklahoma State. So I think that was a big thing for this team because we've seen them be the front runner this year, kind of in, just to boat race and get off to great early leads and then kind of just finish the game that way. But last week showing a little bit of resiliency, I think is big for this team. So I think that Kansas State for me is just a little too Jekyll and Hyde at this point, right? Like there's some weeks to your point where they look like a really good team. I mean, Adrian Martinez is running the ball at an impressive clip, obviously. You have Deuce Vaughn, who I think is one of the best playmakers in all of college football. And they play a good, solid brand of football. They have a pretty good offensive line. Their defense has a couple guys on it. But ultimately, I think it's just TCU is going to have too much fireworks offensively. I think that now that Quentin Johnson's starting to roll, you have the running game obviously there working as well. And it with Kendre Miller, who's been a good player, and Max Duggan has been fantastic this year. So ultimately, I'm just going to go with the more explosive offense. I do think it's going to be a pretty high-scoring game because I think both offenses have shown that they can score when things are rolling, and TCU's defense has struggled a bit at times. So I will go TCU. I think is going to win something in the course of a 44-37 football game. I think it's going to be competitive. I think it's going to be a really good football game, but I think TCU just has a little too much fireworks in this one, and they pull out the victory.
Ryan, I'm with you on that prediction. I have TCU winning. I think it's going to be a little lower scoring game than some people think. I have 34-24 with TCU scoring late. The thing, and the reason is I think this is without question the best defense that they're going to have faced so far. Kansas State, outside the Oklahoma game, Kansas State's defense has been pretty good this year. In the Oklahoma game, really, Oklahoma added a lot of yards late. Like where TCU has or Kansas State kind of had a lead, they backed off their defense. They were kind of letting Oklahoma start to move the ball, but it was taking a lot of plays. If you remember how that game played out. So, to me, I think this is without so far. What, in my opinion, I could be wrong. Kansas State's been the team in the Big 12 that's impressed me the most defensively. That's just kind of where I'm at on this. They rank second in the conference in scoring. Obviously, Iowa State is the best. They benefit from the fact that they've played Iowa, which is going to help any team's scoring defensive numbers. Kansas State's the defense that I trust the most right now to play good football. And so I think they're going to be able to keep TCU's points down a little bit. There's 2 reasons I'm going with TCU, or 3 reasons I'm going with TCU. Number 1, it's a home game. Number 2, I agree with you. I don't think Kansas State has enough firepower to ultimately win this game. I think TCU has shown that even if you make some stops, that they can just rip off a big play at any moment. And I love the way that in TCU third has shown me some resiliency this year, Ryan. I mean, yeah, they came out and they showed that they can blow a team out like they did Oklahoma. But then the next week they get a lead, they get a couple convincing leads over Kansas and then lose them, and then you've got to win at the end. Then the next week they come out, they're losing big multiple times. It's 27-13 in the third quarter. And they show me that they can rally back and win the football game. Like Sonny Dykes is his dad. Sonny Dykes is showing me that his football team is mentally tough because they can win a lot of different ways. And I think that's a big key for them. So I'm going TCU to win 34-24. I just don't think Kansas State has enough balance offensively because this is what I've said before. It's not a great TCU defense, but it's a better DCU defense. They can make stops. That's the thing, is in every game that they've won, even games where they've given up points, they've shown that they can make stops when they need to. And that's what I like about this team. And so I don't think that, they're going to be challenged the way that they were in recent weeks by Kansas and by Oklahoma State. So I think that they'll be able to keep Kansas State's points down. I think they're going to be able to slow the running game down enough where now Adrian Martinez has to beat you with his arm, and I just don't think he's going to be able to do that. And that's really what it boils down to for me. So I'm going with the firepower at TCU combined with I just don't think Kansas State is a team built for shootouts against good teams. They won a shootout against Oklahoma. It's not a good football team. So that's where I'm at for this one, Ryan. I have TCU winning. Would I be shocked if Kansas State wins this game? No, because I think Kansas State's defense is really good. I think this is the best defense TCU will have faced this year. And so you wonder, okay, how is TCU going to handle that? And then the second part of it is, Ryan, I do worry a little bit about the fact that TCU's had to play 2 straight really competitive 4-quarter emotional games in a row against Kansas and Oklahoma State. You do wonder about a bit of a wall, right? And with K-State coming refreshed, you wonder, okay, how is it going to be? At the end, I don't think it's going to also be matter wins and losses, but I do think it's going to be partly why I see the points being a little bit lower in this game. So I have a 27-24 game. TCU punches one in late to put it away, and that's where I get my 34-24 final score. Last game we're going to talk about, Ryan, is your big upset of the week. And I love this one. This is a very fascinating game because I asked you, I said, hey, Ryan, what do you think about – because we'll go through the game and say, which games do we want to talk about? Last week we had to cut 10 games we wanted to talk about because we just didn't have time to do a 7-hour show and preview every single game that we wanted to talk about last week. This week there wasn't as much, so we were kind of going through the games. And I remember the first game I asked you, I said, hey, Ryan, what do you think about doing this Minnesota at Penn State game? It's unranked Minnesota, who's 4-2 at number 16 Penn State, 7:30 on ABC. Penn State is a 4.5-point favorite. But, Ryan, there was something very interesting about this game, which is why you wanted to talk about Minnesota, the Gophers, and the Golden Gophers and the Nittany Lions. Let's talk about it.
Well, if you're on the message board, boards@irishbreakdown.com, you know that Brian every week picks the staff upset of the week. So this week, my upset pick was Minnesota over Penn State. I mean, Brian, honestly – I thought last week when we talked about the Penn State-Michigan game, obviously I picked that game incorrectly, but at worst, I thought that game was going to be a competitive football game, because I thought that they had both shown both sides to stop being able to stop the run and running the football. So I thought it was just kind of be like hitting your head against the wall a little bit, something had to give eventually. Michigan embarrassed Penn State last week, absolutely embarrassed them. And when you see why they won that football game, I mean, it was because Blake Corum ran for 160 yards and Donovan Edwards ran for $170. So
and Ryan, the score of the first half was close, but you watched that game play out and you're like, Michigan should not be – they should be up 2 touchdowns. It reminded me a lot of the first year that Harbaugh played Ohio State. I think Ohio State was winning 13-10 at halftime, but you're like, dude, this game is not that close. Similar to Michigan State, Alabama in the playoff. Remember that in 15 was 7-0 or 10-0 halftime. You're like, dude, this has not been a competitive game. And then they rolled them in the second half. You could see the second half coming even as Penn State was catching a couple breaks. Then they have a lead going into or right before halftime or going into halftime, but you kind of knew no, this game is not going to be pretty in the second half. And it wasn't. So to your point, it was never as close as the score indicated in the first half. Michigan outplayed Penn State in many ways from the beginning. They were by far an inferior opponent in that game.
Michigan's offensive line dominated that day, and their top 2 running backs ran for 330 yards between the two of them. It was just a dominating victory for Michigan. And I think you saw some of the warts of Penn State's run defense because you pointed out last week, Brian, their run defense was good coming into the game, but what great running attacks had they played at that point, right? It's a great point. But I think that this week, now you're going against a Minnesota team that also makes their living off of running the football. That's my biggest thing, right? I think that they have a chance, Minnesota, to come in, establish the running game, run the ball effectively, and for Tanner Morgan to do enough. You don't need Tanner Morgan to be a hero. You need him to be able to manage a football game and not turn the football over. And if those two things happen where they're able to establish the run and Tanner Morgan plays good, solid, carefree football, assignment sounds, all those types of things, I think that you can again see Penn State give up some rushing yards on the ground and not be able to win this football game. So I don't think it's going to be nearly what it was last week, but I think Minnesota can come into this game, establish a line of scrimmage, and they can come out with a 28-20 victory. Penn State's going to be able to score a little bit on Minnesota, but I think Minnesota plays a good style of defense. They run the football, and they don't make many mistakes from the quarterback position. So I had Minnesota in the upset this week over Penn State.
Ryan, Mike, here's my question for you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just setting you up for a response. Obviously, last week you saw Minnesota's offense struggle for the second straight week. They got Muhammad or Ibrahim back, but it just seemed like they could not catch a rhythm in that game offensively. It's now 2 games in a row. Now, Purdue actually has a surprisingly good defense this year, especially their rush defense. And so obviously that factored in not having Ibrahim and playing Purdue. That was the reason for that. I was really disappointed in the Minnesota offense. Do you think Minnesota has the perimeter playmakers that they need to take some of that pressure off the run game, especially with this game being at Happy Valley?
I think that they have enough in the sense that I think that the RPO game, I think, is big for Minnesota. Like when they're rolling, I think that you've seen that that's the best part of Tanner Morgan's game, right? So I think that it's all an extension of the run game. But like to answer your question, Brian, I think they do have enough. And I also think that Minnesota's tight ends are good football players. Like I think of Brevin Spanford, where I think he'll be able to work the seam a little bit, that'll be able to loosen up the box as well in that regard also. So I think that they'll have enough in the passing game just in general on the outside and at tight end to give you enough. And I think that Muhammad Ibrahim working down the gut of the defense, being able to make some guys miss in the hole, being able to churn those hidden yardage, I think that he is the difference maker in this football game ultimately. So I think it's a Penn State team that you came off of a big opportunity and you laid a goose egg. And I think that you just have a little bit of a hangover in the second week now as well. And I think that some of the warts kind of show themselves again for the second straight week for the Penn State run defense.
I dig it. Ryan, I'm going to do something that I did not prepare you for, but we're going to have some fun here, okay? On our IB Nation Sports Talk show with Sean Stiers, one of the things that they do is they do a thing called Rapid Fire. And so you know what they do. That's something Sean brought over with him. I think it's a great segment. So I'm going to kind of do a little something similar to what they do with their Rapid Fire. And I'm going to go through some different games. I'm going to ask you what you think about certain aspects of a game. And I'm going to just have you give me just your gut reaction. And I'm going to begin here. Okay. Does Ohio State cover their 30-point spread against Iowa?
Yes, I think they do, just because I think that Iowa's offense is just so anemic and Ohio State's defense has improved this year, right? So, I mean, we talked about it a little before the show. It's like if Ohio State gets to 30, they might be able to cover the spread with how anemic Iowa's offense is. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yes, because the sad thing is about Iowa this year is their defense is actually pretty good.
It's really good.
It's a pretty good defense, and it's completely getting wasted. Here's my next question. We're going to kind of stay in the state of Ohio to a degree. Cincinnati opens the season with a tough loss to Arkansas. They now have won 5 games in a row. They have cracked the top 25 because it's been 5 ugly wins in a row. They play at SMU, who has taken a step back under Rhett Lashley from where they were. Can SMU pick up a signature win and upset Cincinnati, or do the Bearcats keep rolling?
I think the Bearcats keep rolling in this one. SMU it seems to be something missing there, man. Like they have a good offense with Tanner Mordecai and Rashee Rice, but I think that Cincinnati offensively will be able to score a little bit against SMU. I just don't think that they are the defensive team that you're going to be able to hold Cincinnati down enough. And I think that Cincinnati, although kind of inconsistent from an offensive perspective, they still have some nice guys on the defensive side of the football. So give me Cincinnati in that game. I don't feel great about it, but I'm just having a hard time believing in SMU at all.
Okay, I dig that. I'm actually going with SMU with the upset. It's going to be mine. Here's an interesting one. I was surprised by this spread. Kansas at Baylor. Both teams coming off losses. Kansas lost at Oklahoma. Baylor lost at West Virginia. Baylor is a 10-point favorite.
Woo.
What are your thoughts on that spread?
Take Kansas to cover the spread. That's my thoughts. I mean, even if Jason Bean is playing quarterback again and it's not Jalen Daniels, like that's a lot of points for a team. I know that there's always those get right games, right? Where Baylor, played a bad game against a up and down West Virginia team. Maybe they come back and play a really good game. But Kansas has been a tough out, man. Even when they've lost, it's been competitive football games. So 10 points, give me those 10 points. I'll take those.
Next question. We're going to be in the Big Ten. Okay,
Mhm.
we're gonna look at Rutgers. The Rutgers Scarlet Knights are 3-3. They have wins over Boston College, Wagner, and Temple. They have since lost 3 straight games against Iowa, which is a bad loss, Ohio State, and then last week lost at home to Nebraska. They host Indiana, who has had the
Mhm.
issues of their own. Question for you, Ryan. 2-part question. Number one, does Rutgers get back on track and win the game? They are, I believe, 3.5-point favorites in this game, 3-point favorites in this game. And if they do, does Rutgers go bowling for the right reasons in 2022? Meaning they don't get in because there weren't enough 6-6 or better teams. Now their stretch is at Minnesota, home against Michigan, at Michigan State, home against Penn State, at Maryland. Will they beat Indiana? And if they do, will Rutgers go bowling for the right reasons?
I think it's a yes and a no off the top of my head. Like
Okay.
I think that Rutgers can win this football game. I think that they have a good opportunity because if you watch the Nebraska game, man, that was a back and forth game, and Rutgers had a chance to win that football game. Rutgers has been playing pretty tough football for the most part. I mean, there's just going to be some games where just the talent's
Their
just
offense
too
has very little
yes
ability,
wiggle room,
especially quarterback.
margin for error. Like they just have nothing, man. I mean, honestly, it's been
Their quarterback position is as bad. Iowa might be worse than Iowa. Like
It is.
it's
It is because
yeah,
at least Iowa knows who their guy is. Their guy just isn't good. Rutgers also
yeah,
has no good quarterbacks, and they don't know who their guy is. Like it's just been that type of
yes,
season. So I think that I think that I'll pick them to win this week in that matchup. But I think long term, when you kind of laid out that schedule, I think Rutgers probably only gets to about 5 wins this season. So unless there's another opportunity to go bowling at 5-7, to your question, I don't think they go bowling. But I think that they play a little tougher this year than they have in a couple past years. So they show things are heading it
yeah.
somewhat in the right direction. It's just
Yes, agree. They're trending in
yeah,
the right direction because under previous coaches, they don't go 5-7 last year to even be in position to go
so true.
bowling, and they're not 3-3 this year. You are correct.
Yes.
ACC game. We're gonna go to the ACC. Duke
Mhm.
plays at Miami. Now Duke got off to a great start. Won 4 of their first 3 games. Their only loss 4 of their first 5 games. Only loss was at Kansas in a really competitive football game. They have lost 2 3-pointers in a row at Georgia Tech and home against North Carolina. Played North Carolina very tough. Miami has been wildly erratic. Won their first 2 games, then lost 3 in a row to Texas A&M, Middle Tennessee State, and North Carolina. Bounced back with an ugly but much-needed win last week over Virginia Tech. Can
Yeah.
Duke get back on track and pull off the upset as the 10-point underdog, or does Miami finally start to go on a roll, which then leads them to at Virginia, home against Florida State, at Georgia Tech before their big November 5th matchup against Clemson? So, Ryan, can Duke either A, cover or pull off the upset? And if Miami wins, is this the springboard for Miami to get rolling in advance of their November matchup against Clemson?
I definitely think that Duke can cover the spread. I think 10 points is a lot of points. I think I would pick Miami in this football game to ultimately win, though, and that hurts me a little bit because I've been a supporter of Riley Leonard, Michael Elko, and the Duke football team. I think that they have some good qualities to them. It's the first year under Mike Elko. There's going to be some positions where you just need to continue to evolve and continue to get better. So I think that Miami, especially now that their passing game is starting to get rolling a little bit now, I think that they're just going to outpace Duke a little bit, but I do think Duke covers the spread. I'm not sold on Miami just kind of long term, but
Yeah.
I mean, for this
They've
football
looked
game, I
ugly,
think they can beat them.
ugly
Yeah,
in their win last week against Virginia Tech. That was more about
sure did.
Virginia Tech being bad than it was about Miami. So,
Virginia
yeah,
Tech's
I would
bad,
not be
very bad.
so moral of the story is we both think Miami wins a close game, but neither of us would be shocked if Duke goes on the road and wins this football game. Correct?
100%. 100%.
Okay.
Yep.
We are going to go to a couple games in the Big Ten, or one game in the Big Ten, actually. I do not want to talk about Northwestern Maryland. Purdue at Wisconsin. Purdue's 5-2. Purdue's 5-2 is one of a very impressive 5-2. They had a loss against Penn State where they really outplayed Penn State till the very end. And then they had a loss to Syracuse where they played toe-to-toe with an undefeated Syracuse for the entire game. They beat Indiana State 56-0, Florida Atlantic by only 2, but without Aiden O'Donnell. And then they beat Minnesota on the road. They beat Maryland on the road. And then they beat Nebraska last week. They're playing Wisconsin, who is a 2.5-point favorite. So my question is, what the freaking heck does Vegas constantly see in Wisconsin? They were favored last week to beat Michigan State and lost. How does a team that fired their coach and lost to Michigan State, How are they favored at home over Purdue? Explain that to me, and then tell me who you think is going to win that game.
It's a tough one. I would lean Purdue in this football game if I had to, because I think for the reasons that we've talked about already, Purdue's defense has played a lot better than you would think. And as long as Aiden O'Connell is healthy, I think that you're going to be in a pretty good position offensively. So I think those things outweigh it. What's the reasoning, Brian? I have no idea. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, man, like
it's every year, the metrics or the analytics always make out Wisconsin to be something that they're not. It was like last year. No matter how many games they lost, they kept staying in the top 15 of the S&P Plus thing or whatever. You know, it's like, and I get it. We picked Michigan State to win last week too. Like I think you did as well. Yes. I know Sean Stiers did. Yes. I did because I'm like, no, like okay, they beat Northwestern, guys. Northwestern is awful. Yeah.
They're really
awful. They might actually be able to lose to UConn. Like that's how bad they are. So Jim Moore's actually doing. I mean, UConn's terrible, but they're actually play tough. Have you watched them?
They're better than they were last year.
He's doing I mean, he has no talent, but he's doing a nice job of getting those kids to compete every week. Anyway, so yes, I don't get Vegas' analytics infatuation with Wisconsin.
My mind is going, Brian. Typically a Wisconsin team runs the football well and plays good defense, but this year is not a typical Wisconsin team. So I can't explain it. I mean. You could sell Braylon Allen to me. He's a great football player. You could say Keanu Benton to me, the defensive tackle, because he's a really good football player as well. But as far as being a favorite right now against Purdue, especially, that has been a tough out for everyone. I can't explain it either. Can't do it for you.
Last one in the SEC, Ryan. Texas A&M at 3-3 goes on the road to play South Carolina, who is 4-2. Now, South Carolina is a fascinating team because after 3 games, I'm like, this is going to be a rough year for South Carolina.
Yep.
They had an ugly win over Georgia State, won by 21, but it was sloppy. Got blasted by Arkansas, got annihilated at home by Georgia. Since then, they beat Charlotte. Nobody cares. South Carolina State. Nobody cares. Last week, they went on the road and beat Kentucky by 10.
Yep.
So what do we make of South Carolina? Was last week a fluky win, or is Shane Beamer turning the program's corner with why am I forgetting the quarterback's name? Spencer Rattler. I kept wanting to say Spencer Riley. Spencer Rattler, quarterback. Are they turning the corner with that duo, and do they knock off Texas A&M, or was last week a fluke and the Aggies go on the road and roll? And I have a follow-up question once you tell me how you see this playing out.
Look, I wouldn't be surprised if this game goes either way, if I'm being honest. But I think that for me, I buy more into it being a little bit of a fluke last week, Brian. I mean, that was one of the scores where you're like, South Carolina beat Kentucky 26-16. Like, what the heck is that? That was a bizarre score. And I'm not buying into South Carolina,
right? I mean, that's true. They never Will Levis, which is
that's big. That's big, but I mean, even still, man, I'm just like I'm having trouble buying into the South Carolina team. Rattler has not been very good. The passing game weapons have not been entirely good this year. The defense has kind of been a little up and down and not spectacular. So I just don't think South Carolina is a very good football team. So I think ultimately Texas A&M has an advantage in talent. So I would opt for the talent in this one. So I think they win. I don't think it's a convincing victory, but I would take Texas A&M in this game. I can't buy into South Carolina as another upset bid.
I get it. And well, the interesting thing is that is based on the 3-point spread. It would sound like Vegas agrees with you that Texas A&M is going to get the win. Here's my follow-up question. By the way, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I hope you're wrong. I hope we are wrong, but I don't disagree with you. Here's the question. Yep. If South Carolina wins this football game, does that mark the beginning of the end of the Jimbo Fisher era in Texas and in College Station? Can he recover from a 3-4 start and that includes a loss to South Carolina?
I mean, with how they've looked the last couple of years, Brian, I mean, this has been an awful year because, I mean, you go from Haynes King is your quarterback to Max Johnson hurt, and then you're making excuses that Haynes King is a backup quarterback. It's like, hey, Jimbo, he was your starting quarterback to start the year, buddy. Like, he's not a backup quarterback for you.
Right. Right.
There's just a lot of excuses. And at some point, Brian, like the acquisition of talent's awesome. You know, like Jimbo recruits very well, or his staff recruits very well, I should say.
And the
But
boosters
it's
help
just
him recruit really well.
yes. They give him a lot of reasons to come to.
And they give him a
Texas
lot of
A&M.
resources to go recruit
Yes.
well.
100%. But I mean, yes, if you fall to 3-4 and you just have not seen improvements over the last couple of years, I would say that you've even trended downward this year.
Yes.
Then at what point do you just kind of go like, hey man, he might be a good recruiter, but like this isn't working. Like it's not working. You know, it's not going to get any better from here. So I think it could be a downfall for him if he loses to South Carolina. Ultimately, I think Texas A&M is just going to pull away in this game. But to your point, if South Carolina wins, this could be a very tough thing for Jimbo to start explaining to the administration and the boosters around the program.
Because they have not looked like. Here's my question: does the Alabama loss, and this isn't for you to answer, it's just rhetorical, does the Alabama loss kind of crush them because they're 3-3 now, and you got to sit with it the whole bye week, or is it, hey, we went toe to toe with Bama, we are actually pretty good, we're going to bounce back? That's going to be the big question for A&M. Now, here's my other question, Ryan: if A&M loses this game, do they make a bowl game? They'd be 3-4. They play Ole Miss next week at home. Then they play Florida at home, at Auburn, home against UMass. That's a win. And then they're home against LSU. 3-4 against that schedule. Can't beat South Carolina. Your wins are a 2-point win over Arkansas, who's clearly not as good as we thought. A ugly 8-point win over Miami, and a sloppy 31-0 win over Sam Houston. So if they lose to South Carolina, does Texas A&M go bowling?
It's really close. It's really because I think they'll beat Auburn. I think they'll beat UMass, obviously. Can you get one more win out of the last three? I mean,
here's
that's
the thing,
part.
though, right? What you said is if you can lose to South Carolina and App State and barely beat Miami, you can lose to Auburn.
You can.
Here's what I'll say about Auburn. They're not a great team, but they're playing hard for Brian Harsin. They are. They battled Ole Miss last week. They battled LSU. They compete. Right. And I thought they were going to quit after they got annihilated by Penn State. I thought they were going to quit. And they didn't. They've rallied around them. Now, does that keep happening as they keep losing? That's a question. That's a different question for a different day. Right. And what Auburn has, they have Arkansas, they have a bye week this week, then they have Arkansas at home, then they're at Mississippi State before they play. If they can win one of those two games, I do think they have a shot to beat A&M at home. But if they lose their next two games, that's when Auburn checks out and A&M will go on the road and beat them. That'll be the interesting thing. But if they lose to South Carolina, my prediction is that A&M will not make a bowl game because again, this is what happens when you buy your players, and the way that they bought their players, they're not invested. They didn't commit to you and your program; they committed to a dollar amount, and that is when you see, it's like hiring a bunch of mercenaries to fight a war, right? Like they're not invested in the cause. They're eventually the money isn't worth what they're going through. And that's kind of that's the interesting aspect of it for me. So, yes, A&M, Ryan, this is a big weekend for them. Who'd have thought that the South Carolina game could be the end-all be-all for Jimbo Fisher's tenure?
Because if they don't go bowling, there's no chance to come back from it, right? Like there's zero chance, I think, right?
I don't think they fire him, but I think the program is so far gone that you're not going to be able to sell recruiting anymore. Like, dude, you signed the number one class, you had a losing record, and you lost to South Carolina and Appalachian State, and you know what I mean? Like you weren't good. So it's going to get very interesting. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show, Ryan. We do have some questions for the mailbag. We'll get to those next. We have a couple super chats I want to get to. Chief Brody asks, might be a dumb question, but why don't they run anything quick to get Drew and the wide receivers in rhythm? I don't see a ton of slants and hitches, quick reads. Now, regarding like hitches and stuff like that, Ryan, that's not really something Notre Dame can do right now because everyone's pressing them. And until they can show that they can beat teams on the perimeter down the field, teams are just going to keep pressing them. They're going to keep pressing you until you make them pay for it, more than just once, right? Now, maybe the Merriweather touchdown is a start of that, but you've got to show but that was from the slot. It was against zero coverage, but it was from the slot. You got to show you can get off press coverage, make plays down the field. One way to do that is to put bigger guys out there. I do think there's some quick stuff they can do, Ryan. I do think slants from the slot can work, especially as aggressive as teams are attacking you downhill at linebacker level. I think there's some crossers and some unders and some rub type stuff that they can do to get some quick game going. But when teams are putting that much in the box, and pressing you outside, there's not a lot of room to throw a quick game. There really isn't.
Yep.
That's why they need to, we talk about hit some of those crossers and those overs and those climbs and routes like that. That's why we talk about putting different personnel on the field, because teams are taking away that quick stuff. That's why we haven't talked a lot about quick game. You got to back teams off before you can open up the quick game. Now, the slant stuff, the slants and the glances, Ryan, that is stuff that I think they can and should be hitting. It's some of that stuff right behind the linebacker levels.
100%. Yeah, and I think also if you start to implement a little more of the screen game and RPO game, right? Like that stuff I think can get you some really easy stuff, right, Chief? Like you just, hey man, here comes that apex player is now coming down into the box, and I just throw a bubble out there. I throw a now screen, and you just kind of loosen the box up a little bit. And then that's kind of how you get early rhythm, right? And then you let Lorenzo run in space a little bit. You let Braden Lindsay create in space. You let whoever create in space. Like you have the players that can do a little bit of that, even if it's just the screen game as well. So RPO game, screen game, to your point, Brian, the slants from the slot. I mean, you could also make that off the RPO game, right? Like it's a quick little arrow route off of the RPO and doing all that type of stuff. So I think getting the ball out in space and letting them move, man, is a big thing. I think it'll help rhythm of the offense. And I think you have some players that have explosiveness to create after the catch. So it's advantageous to your offense on top of getting Drew Pine in rhythm.
I have a super chat from Tristan Paul. He has in Notre Dame 38, UNLV 22. I think Drew Pine and the offense can have a good stepping stone game this week and hopefully make a jump. I would definitely like to see that. If the offense can gain some rhythm, that would be very, very good for Notre Dame. And thank you for the super chat, Tristan Paul. We appreciate that very, very much. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop with the super chat. Texas would have beat Bama as well with Quinn Ewers. I certainly think that's possible, but I don't know if it's the given. Like I have contended, Ryan, and I will take this to my grave. If Colt McCoy does not get hurt against Alabama in 2009, Texas wins that football game. I mean, It was a close game until that Garrett Gilbert interception late in the first half. They were up 6-0. They went on 2 straight scoring drives with Colt at quarterback. Now, they couldn't punch it in the end zone, but that was a really, really good Texas team when Colt McCoy was in the game. Garrett Gilbert was not beating Alabama. So that's kind of how I felt about it. And so I think that I didn't feel the same way. I thought that Alabama, I think the game probably would have ended in similar fashion, but more points for both teams.
Yes.
I think because that's what I think would have happened. I think Alabama would have had to respond to certain things and made changes sooner if Quinn would have played. I just don't know if they would have been able to pull that one off. But I'm also not going to say that Charlie's wrong because I could see it. I mean, it was a close game when he was in there, and it was a close game when he wasn't in there.
I just don't like the hypotheticals sometimes in that situation, Brian, because it's like, we make Quinn Ewers almost like a mythical thing, right? Like he can't make a mistake in the second half. He can't throw an interception. He can't fumble. Like who's to say that he has this perfect – I mean, it wasn't perfect in the first half, but like he was mistake-free and he was moving the football. Like he was doing some good stuff, obviously. Who's to say that he plays a perfect second half, right? He plays a good second half. You never know. I mean, we're talking about humans, right? So like mistakes are going to happen. I think that it's very possible, Charlie. I push back against the hypothetical. And I will say, if it ends up being a contest of Quinn Ewers versus Bryce Young, because I agree with you, Brian. I think it's just a different looking football game at the end. I'm going to take Bryce Young to win that football game, right? Like if it's Hendon Hooker on the other side, that could be a different story. But Quinn Ewers, first year starter, I probably would still take Bryce Young in the end.
Yep, absolutely. I'm with you on that. I agree with you on that. Like the hypothetical I have for the 09 game, that's my opinion. I can't prove it. Right? Yeah. Like I can also say if Notre Dame would have beat BC, they would have beat Nebraska and won a title in 93. I don't know that. Or Tennessee, whoever they would have played. I don't know that. That's what I think. No. But I just don't feel like the game was necessarily going that direction where they definitely would have. And we still don't know, how would Quinn Ewers have handled the fourth quarter of that game? We have no idea. I mean, we could argue that there was no pressure on Hudson Card because he's the backup. Maybe the pressure – we don't know. I could make a lot of different examples of that. And, so we'll kind of – we'll see. I mean, you could say the same about 09 when maybe Bama would have opened things up a little bit more if Colt McCoy's in the game, knowing that they – there's all types of things, but it does make for interesting conversation, that's for sure. Kyle Wade says, my keys to victory, Tobias Merriweather, volume and explosiveness. Defensive line is allowed to just rush as if every play is a pass, disrupt. That's it. I dig it. This is a great observation from John A1 This season feels like 2009 when you knew the team should have won most of the games where they came up short. And I agree wholeheartedly. The 2009 Notre Dame team was 7 or 8 plays away from being 11-1. I mean, that was such a weird year when you look at that season. You know, obviously you have the big win over Nevada. You play Michigan the next week. You give up the kick return for a big play. You have the play that the Armando Allen touchdown on the screen that gets called back because they ruled that he stepped out. No, I'm sorry. They didn't rule he stepped out. They ruled it a touchdown, and then replay overturned it, and they should not have overturned it. You had so many mistakes. You couldn't tackle Tate Forcier. You know, you were a play here, a play there from winning that game. You lost 38-34. Then they won their next 3 games, started that season 4-1. Then they play USC. I thought that was the one game where Notre Dame got outplayed. You know, USC was up big. Jimmy brought him back, had that gorgeous touchdown pass to Golden Tate over top of a corner and Taylor Mays. Notre Dame came back and made that a game, but I thought USC was the better team that day. And then you go out and the next week you beat BC, you smack Washington State down in San Antonio. Then you lose at home to Navy, which is embarrassing. I think that's the game where Jimmy threw a pass off of Michael Floyd's back and got picked off. Should have won that game. You lose the next week at Pitt, 27-22. That's the game you could argue might have also been a loss because Pitt outplayed Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I don't think, really led much that game. Golden Tate had a punt return for a touchdown, but I just felt like if Notre Dame was a better team and had a better mindset because they were winning games, I think they would have outplayed Pitt. And then, of course, you have the 3-point loss at home to Connecticut and then a 7-point loss to Stanford, which was a shootout. I mean, they were literally in every single game that they lost. I mean, their biggest point differential that year, Ryan, was 7 points. They had 2 7-point losses, a 4-point loss, a 2-point loss, a 5-point loss, and a 3-point loss. And you know that this team's had wider margin in their one loss to Ohio State, but it was a game where they controlled the action longer than Ohio State controlled the action. I mean, that's Notre Dame led for more minutes in that game than Ohio State led. Yep. But yeah, I mean, it's similar. I just hope this team can turn it around in ways that team couldn't. That's my only hope. Is that they can, because that team just invented ways to lose. I mean, I don't know if this team will do that or not. I hope not. Brent Smith says, Brian and Ryan, do you actually believe Reese will make all of the appropriate changes in 1 week? Secondly, we tend to forget our quarterback is inexperienced, limited, and not Tyler Buckner. We don't forget that at all. We've made that point multiple times this week. And that's what was so frustrating about the game plan last week, Brent, is because you were calling a game for a guy that was making his 13th or 14th start, not a guy making his 3rd start, you know, at night in front of a loud environment. We haven't forgot that. I think maybe the offensive coordinator forgot that a little bit. He was making his 4 start last week, excuse me. Yeah. But no, I mean, that's why we're calling for what we're calling for, Brent. When we talk about simplify the offense, get the ball out quicker, you know, find ways to simplify the reads, all that tempo, all that stuff is designed to take some of the pressure off of Drew Pine, because we have not forgotten that. But to the first question, Ryan, do you actually believe Reese will make all the appropriate changes in 1 week? Now, we don't know, but do you think he will is the question. We're not predicting it. He's asking our opinion. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, Brian, like, I hope that he makes 1 or 2. Like, I don't want him. I would love him to make every change that we've talked about this week or that we've talked about the last couple of weeks. But in reality, it's not feasible to think that will happen, right? Like, he's not. I just don't think that they're going to make that much of a change in 1 week, unfortunately, right? Like, I think that I would like to think that Tommy Reese is going to look at the offense and say, hey, this is something that I need to change, or maybe these couple things, and at least that's a starting point, right? Like, I'm not asking for everything to be magically fixed in 1 week, but what I'm asking for is that there's some self-awareness that there's a problem, right? And I think that that's what we keep talking about is I need Tommy Reese to look at himself in the mirror and be like, hey, what am I doing that's wrong, right? Like, what do I need to improve on? What can I do to make this team better? So I would honestly settle Brent just for 1 or 2 things to be changed. Because I mean, no, I don't have any confidence that everything is going to change. I think that's very unreasonable. But if it's 1 or 2 things, I think that's a very solid showing or solid trends, right? Is that at least he understands that something does need to get fixed. If he doesn't think it, then nothing's going to change at all. But I think little growth is what I'm looking for, man. Just something, a little bit of growth.
Do I think he will make changes this week? Yes. Do I think he'll make all those changes? No. Here's the rub. Do I think those changes will be permanent? No. I think what will happen most likely is some of the changes he makes get them, or against BYU or UNLV. But if they have a couple games of success, he's going to go right back to what he thought was the right thing to do to begin with. Because normally when you change something because somebody else tells you to or because you've had failure, it usually is not because you think it's the right thing to do. It's because the thing you have to do. That's my fear. Right. I hope I'm wrong. But even if we do see changes on Saturday, I'm going to need to see him. It'll be a good starting point, a good foundation, but I'm going to need to see those changes sort of replicated and then added onto against Syracuse, and that's where I lose my lack of faith in that they'll be made. And I hope I'm wrong. I would love to see Coach Reese make those changes, but I don't see it. Like now, I just saw somebody on Twitter respond to me saying, like, maybe it's not Coach Reese's fault. Marcus Freeman talks to Jim Tressel. Maybe Marcus Freeman is making him do these game plans. I'm like, dude, good God. Like, how many excuses? It's like he's the new Brian Kelly. We're just, no matter what happens, we're not going to blame him for anything. It's always somebody else's fault. Like,
so we're blaming Jim Tressel on this.
Right.
Nice.
Well, and
That's
I
awesome.
get where the guy's coming from. I'm not hammering the guy. I mean, you're just looking for reasons because I think part of it is like it can't be this stupid. Mm-hmm. It's just like I get it. It's just
mm-hmm.
Come on.
It's frustrating.
Like,
it's frustrating.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
Garland Dixon with a question. I think Tommy tries to give teams too much to think about, that he schemes his own players out of being able to be comfortable. 100% agree. 100% agree. Here's an important question, Ryan.
Yep.
Anthony Solomon wants to know did you steal Vince's prediction or did he steal yours?
Anthony, I would say that Brian is probably the better person to ask this because I submit it blindly. I don't know when Vince submits his, so I wonder who submitted theirs first.
First person. Vince and Sean Davis are usually the last two guys to submit their picks. Vince has been like after the games have started at times, like, I forgot to send these to you. Yeah. Vince actually sent his in first this week. And then, of course, let me know about it, right? I sent my picks in already.
I got him in.
Good job. Good job, buddy. Good job. But he did it in. Now, I will say this. Nobody knows what other guys pick. I'm the only person that knows what other people pick until the article's published. So they were about a day apart, but they both sent them in independently. So he did not see Vince's score, but Vince sent his in first. So I have to go with Ryan stole that one if we have to answer it that way.
I guess, Anthony, I stole it then. We'll go with that, I guess. Yep.
So messed up. Prediction plagiarism. Brent Smith asks, Al Washington is a great recruiter, but a great coach. I'm not so sure. Brian and Ryan, what say you? I would kind of push back against the first one right now. I mean, for Notre Dame, he did some good things at Ohio State, obviously, but you could also argue that some of his base successes were just keeping Ohio kids, right? Like some of his biggest, like CJ Hicks, for instance, right? It's like, well, it's a great win, but like he's also all of his linebackers last year were Ohio kids. All of them were Ohio kids. Yeah. Right.
So, I know he had a hand in like Travion Henderson out of Virginia. So like, he's a good recruiter, obviously, but so far this year, we've talked in nauseam about the Keon Keeley thing, but that was a big thing for him was to keep Keon in the class, right? Like that was a big thing. You missed out on Jason Moore.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. So it has not materialized on the great recruiter part. I'll say this, Brian, I have not seen enough from Coach Washington to have a actual opinion. Right now, I think that the defensive line has been very up and down. I don't think that it's been as good as it should be. I think it's taken a step back from what it was last year, if we're being completely honest. So I think the jury is out on Al Washington right now. Could it be better? Could it improve? Yeah, I'm going to give it more time. There's no doubt. But to the question, Brent, like I don't know the answer to this right now. I don't. I like some of the stuff I saw from Al Washington in the past, from his time at Boston College, and then some of the work that he did at Ohio State. But right now, the defensive line is not playing up to caliber. So the answer is I don't know. I'm still hopeful, but I do think the jury is out on Al Washington. I don't know what to think right now about him.
Yeah. I want to pull this up because somebody just said this. Somebody said irony. Just read that Saban just added former Ohio State coach Zach Smith to the Bama staff and serve as special behavior counsel for players came days after the Burton fan incident in Knoxville. I think that was a joke. I think that tweet going around was sarcasm. I don't think that actually happened. I've seen nothing official about that. I think that it was just being sarcastic that he's hiring a guy that was accused of what Zach Smith was accused of to coach his players to handle situations. So I don't think that actually happened. I've seen no actual news reports to say that happened. So I just wanted to remind people of that. I don't think that's a real thing. All right, we got a super chat from Tyler Evans, Ryan, and I'll have you address this one for about the specifics of it. But I saw the Twitter thing, but I didn't see it actually happen. Tyler Evans, thank you for the super chat. But he says, "What do you think of the Kyler Murray cussing out Cliff Kingsbury on the sideline? That happened in last night's game, correct?"
Yes.
Ryan, and how would you handle that situation if you were the head coach?
In the moment, I mean, it's a tough situation to be in because that's the leader of your football team, right? And it's a little bit different. Obviously, we're talking about the NFL to the college game because NFL, it's just a different vibe of how coaches talk to players, how they can kind of be disciplinarians. Like, it's a little bit of a different vibe, Tyler. I mean, my general thoughts, though, is that who would have thought that Cliff Kingsbury would not be a good NFL head coach after not being a good college football coach? Right. Like, who would have thought, right? It's crazy. It's a dysfunctional thing right now in Arizona. I don't think he's the guy long-term there. So I think that's more just a point of like, hey, man, people are frustrated. Even though they ended up getting the win last night, if you're the Cardinals, it was more off of the defensive performance from the Cardinals and the blunders of Andy Dalton last night, throwing 2 pick sixes, right? So I think that what you're seeing is there's frustration because Cliff is just not the guy there. How do you handle that in the moment? I don't have a perfect answer for that, man, because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're the head coach, but Kyler Murray's a grown man making millions and millions of dollars, so it's just a different dynamic than like a college coach, being a disciplinarian and getting him off the field, take him out of the football game. Like, you can't take Kyler Murray out of the football game. You're paying him $40 million a year to be your guy, right? So I don't think there's a perfect answer to the situation at hand. I just think, again, it's further proof that Cliff Kingsbury is not the guy. Like, he's just not that guy for the Cardinals. And
neither is Kyler Murray, in my opinion. Here's the thing. Like, you're right. Like, how I would handle that as a college coach, your butt's on the bench. And,
exactly.
It ain't happening. But that dude makes more than the head coach, right? And there's going to come a day where that's going to be that. There's going to come a day where that's the reality in college football, and it's not that far down the road.
Yep.
So, when it's a different dynamic in the NFL. I mean, if it comes down to it, I mean, look, I remember a story that came out about the Broncos, that Dan Reeves, who had taken the Broncos to 3 Super Bowls and had a lot of success winning and losing, kind of went to Pat Bowlen with the potential of trading John Elway to the Washington Redskins. And that was pretty much the end of his career in Denver as the head coach. Because, like, dude, if I got to pick between you and John Elway, I hate to break it to you, partner, but that's an easy one for me. I'm going with the GOAT, right? I mean, that's where you're going with it on that one. So it's just the reality of it. It also shows a supreme lack of maturity by Kyler Murray. I don't really care what the circumstance is. You wouldn't want me to talk to you that way. I actually thought Cliff Kingsbury showed good restraint. I mean, that's one of those ones where you have it out with him in the locker room. You don't respond in kind. And we're seeing a lot more. Maybe it's just because they're picking it up on cameras, but like every time I open up Twitter, there's like some coach player incident on the sideline. And I think part of it is that everyone's got a cell phone camera now. So like back in the day, those things would happen, but you just couldn't see it, But, we're seeing it a lot now. You had the thing with Robbie Anderson and the receivers coach. But I thought the receivers coach for Carolina sort of escalated what was a stupid thing Robbie Anderson was acting like, in my opinion, like you shouldn't conduct yourself that way. Like, here's the thing. If you're a player, don't go at a coach in a way you don't want that coach to come at you, right? If you're a coach and you're going to rip players, these are grown men, these are professionals, then don't be pissed off when they come back at you in a similar fashion, right? It's a different dynamic in the NFL now than it used to be. And the players have all the power in the NFL relative to coaches.
They do.
Right? Relative to coaches. Not so much GMs and owners, but I mean, that's just the reality of it. With few exceptions. I mean, New England's an exception, right? I mean, there are a few exceptions, but like, especially if you're Cliff Kingsbury. But I don't think Kyler Murray has the maturity to be a great NFL quarterback. I just don't. He's shown me nothing from what I've talked to people, read statistically. I don't watch him play. I'm just going by what people I've talked to and different things. He's got a ton of talent, but I mean, the fact that you had to write in this contract that he has to watch at least X amount of film, there's a reason that they can walk that back all they want. There's a reason that language is put in his contract. And not everybody else's, because he's not putting in the work. So And you just look at him body shape wise, he just does not look like a guy that has working in the gym as much as maybe he should be working in the gym. You know, you just all of it. It's just like, I don't know. That's the guy that I'm hitching my wagon to if I'm an NFL franchise. I'm just not.
Unfortunately, they have already, which makes
it a tough
situation.
Yeah. But that's why the Cardinals suck. You know, it's dumb enough to hire Cliff Kingsbury, and I like drafting Kyler #1 overall. I'm fine with that. But there's
he's great talent.
Yeah, there's no accountability there. So then you give him that big contract. You're like, of course he's going to act however he wants now. Like you lost your window to help him grow up. That's the problem. You know, and that's why they're going to stink. So anyway, that, I mean, how I would handle that, how I would have handled that, like I would have gone right back at him. That's just my attitude. And I would have been wrong. So. I would have been wrong. Yeah. I'm just, you're not going to come at me. I'm going to come back at you. That's also partly why I've said I like being in the booth because you can control yourself a little bit more. I would not have handled it the way Cliff Kingsbury did, and I would have been wrong. So as much as I dislike Cliff Kingsbury, just kind of letting Kyler do his thing was, I thought, the way to go, and not escalating it. It was the way to go. But I would have had some very harsh. Because like, here's my thing: if I'm at that moment, you got to know I'm done as the coach here, right? Like I'm done. Like I can't have the quarterback doing this to me. I'm done. So I'm going out in a blaze of glory. Like that would have been my thought process. Like I'm a grown man too. You know, I'm a millionaire too. You're not coming to me this way. You know what I'm saying? And if this is going to be the thing that gets me, I'm going to be fired because I fought back, not because I stood there and took it like a you-know-what. That's my thing.
Especially because I don't know if it was reported what Cliff said to Kyler before he reacted, but like, especially if like he was just like telling him something and not cursing at him, and then that's Kyler's reaction. Like I'm the same way. I'm a hothead, so I'd have been like, "Excuse me, who are you talking to? Right. You're talking to me like that? I'm a grown man too, buddy. Like that's not how that's going to fly. You know what I mean?" So tough situation if you're Cliff.
Right. Yep. So, and of course, Kyler Murray, all I said was to tell him to chill out. Like, yeah, that's a weird way of telling someone to chill out. So,
seriously.
Yeah, I'd be done with it. I'd be done with it. So, but yeah, shocker that Cliff Kingsbury's not panning out as a successful head coach. That was always a dumb move.
The most wins he ever had as a college head coach was like 7 or 8 wins, and you're shocked that he's not a good NFL coach. Like, all right.
Didn't some dude from Pro Football Focus have him as like a top 5 coach like a year ago?
Yeah, and then the Cardinals hired him as an analytics guy, so makes sense.
Unbelievable. So ridiculous. Connor Grant with a super chat. Why doesn't Notre Dame produce many top NFL quarterbacks? Is it a recruiting problem? To a degree. I mean, they're not recruiting the elite of the elite quarterbacks. I mean, that's to a degree that's there. I mean, but it's also a development thing. I mean, if we're being honest, it's not just that. I mean, Mac Jones was not a great prospect coming out. Joe Burrow was the number 288 player in the country. Jalen Hurts was not a top 100 quarterback coming out, top 100 player coming out of high school. They're not recruiting well they're not recruiting well enough to produce like number 1 picks. Producing NFL quarterbacks, period, that's a development problem. They've had several guys that had the talent to be NFL quarterbacks. Everett Golson had the physical talent to be an NFL quarterback. He lacked maturity at times, and then the development was an issue, right? Deshaun Kaiser was a second-round NFL draft pick. He was not
first-round talent.
Right. He was not taught how to be a grown-up at Notre Dame. That was his problem. He was not taught by the staff to act like a grown-up, and there was no accountability for him. So he could do whatever he'd want, and you'd still put him in over Malik Zaire, which was a mistake, you know? And so Phil Dracovic, you didn't coach him up. I mean, you could go down the long list of guys, you know, but
at least the book went the 4th round.
Yeah, I know, right? And you know, Brady Quinn, you know, partly was the product of a system, but also partly I think went to a bad situation.
Terrible
in
situation.
Cleveland.
Yeah.
Jimmy Clausen similarly. I think Jimmy's problem was by the time he got to the NFL, his lower body was so beat up he just couldn't move. I mean, he was never a mobile guy anyway. I mean, Jimmy threw some great balls in the NFL. I mean, I could go find his highlight tape, and you're like, dude, that guy can throw the ball like an NFL quarterback. He had no leadership and no mobility. And you can get away with that if you're Joe Flacco's size. You can't get away with that when you're Jimmy Clausen's size. You just can't. And then you combine that with the lack of leadership, and I think that doomed him, in my opinion. So some of it's not necessarily their fault, but yeah, you got to recruit a little better, but it's really a development thing. It really is. Yep. It's a development thing. It's been a recruiting thing the last few years under Tommy Rees, but for years it wasn't under previous quarterback coaches. It wasn't a recruiting thing until Mike Sanford showed up. Then it became more of a recruiting problem because you went back-to-back years where you had Ian Book and Avery Davis as your quarterbacks. I want to go back to this one here. I think I forgot to I wanted to say this too.
Yep.
He's been disappointing as a defensive line coach so far for me, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But the recruiting thing too is the concerning one. So you got Brandon Davis Swain taking visits every weekend somewhere else. Yep. You've got Boubacar Traore, but you should have landed him, right? He was it's a Catholic school kid in Massachusetts. How do you not win that one?
That you flipped from Boston College.
Right.
Yeah,
Armel Mukam, you flipped from Stanford. He's like you should have got that one, right? I mean, Owen Wafel, this isn't to say he's not a good player. He is, but it's like, of course Notre Dame's going to get Owen Wafel. Like, it doesn't matter who the D-line. Name me a guy he's picked up so far and kept that whoever was the D-line coach wouldn't have also landed unless they just were incompetent. That's what I say. The way you could have proven to me you were a great recruiter is keeping Keon in the class and then get Jason Moore. One of those two. Really only do one of them.
Yep.
You only do one of them.
Because you feel a lot. Because if you're a fan, you feel a lot different about this defensive line class right now. If you have Jason Moore in it, right? Even if you lost Keon Keeley, like you feel a lot different about it. You do.
That's right. We have along those same lines. Here's a question from Robert Bishop. In your opinion, had Keon Keeley's ranking not changed, would he have remained in this class? And I think 100%. I do.
Yeah,
I do. I think 100%, because I think it wasn't just about those other schools were pursuing him, but it was about the 5-star status and what other recruiting services were doing in his recruitment, and sort of manipulating that as well. So I do think they would have kept him in that instance. I do. All right, next question from Mr. Sanders. Can we expect Freeman to be more involved, holding accountable with OCs going forward, or is it to be determined? It's to be determined, but I have talked to several sources this week that make me more confident that we will see that and are starting to see that. Whether a lot of it happens now or in the offseason, I don't know, and that's why it's still to be determined to a degree, but I do think he's at least engaged in communication that makes me think that there's a chance that this could get turned around. But at this point in time, guys, I don't care what anybody tells me about anything. I need to see it at this point in time. Robert Bishop says, Ryan, does UNLV use the shuttle pass? Seems like that tore us up last week. Can I answer for you, Ryan?
Sure.
Haven't really seen it much, but I bet you we see it this week. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, why would you not after last week?
Yep.
All right, here's one I'll let you answer, Ryan. Bill Walsh, will Mills play inside in this game? Will we see some Ahrensberger?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the first part, Bill, I feel pretty confidently because we have seen Riley Mills play a little bit more inside anyway over the last few weeks, right? So I think that's something that they're going to be using. And we talked about, obviously, Jason Adamalola might not be able to go in this game. We'll obviously see that as a game time decision, but I do think you'll see Riley more inside. If that does happen, reps have to go somewhere. So I hope Ahrensberger gets a fair shake. I don't know the answers to the second part, though. I don't know if he's going to be a part of the game plan. I don't know. But to the first part of the question, Bill, yeah, I think that you will see Riley more inside because I think you were already kind of seeing that, kind of that trajectory a little bit.
Yeah, especially against a team like this. I think especially we would see it then for sure. Beefeater asked, B. Ryan, would it help to switch one of the safeties to the rover position?
I mean, in certain spots, I think it would be a good spot, right? I mean, like, so there's
we've
different
talked
ways
about that before with Ramon Henderson, Ryan. We've mentioned that before.
Yeah, I mean, Toe Jam, I think that there's a way that you can look at it, right? If Notre Dame's playing a true nickel, where they have a nickel corner, whether it is Tariq Bracy or Clarence Lewis in at the nickel, that works great against spread teams. But there's going to be some teams that, although they may still be spread in theory, there's still teams that want to run the football a ton. Might want a little bit of a bigger nickel in there, right? So I think that's where you can put a Ramon Henderson in the nickel or a Xavier Watts maybe against certain teams. So to answer your question, I think that you're seeing a lot more 3 safety looks on the college level just in general, and I think that Notre Dame can utilize that. You could just phrase it still as your nickel defense, but you're using a big nickel instead of your Tariq Brace, your Clarence Lewis. I think that should absolutely be something that they take a look at. I believe so, yeah.
Craig Bolton asked, do you think if Freeman was still calling the defense that we would have lost to Marshall and Stanford? I know that the offense has struggled, but it looks like the defense has also regressed. I think they still would have lost to Stanford because the offense couldn't score.
Yeah.
Do I think they would have lost to Marshall if he was still the defensive coordinator? No, I do not. No, I do not. And I think that we might see a different team by the time they got to Stanford because they didn't lose to Marshall. I mean, those things all pile up, but I'm not blaming the defense for that one. I thought the defensive game plan against Marshall was bad. It was really bad. Yeah. And then changing in the middle of the week was even worse. It was even worse. 99 Problems BK1 has a suggestion for the offense. He wants to see Tobias Merriweather as the field receiver, Colsey and Thomas rotate as the boundary, Styles and Lindsey in the slot. I just want to see that against UNLV. I would say I would want some go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I would want more Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey into the boundary as kind of a rotation. Yes. I don't want to see Jaden Thomas in the boundary. I want to see him in the slot a little bit more.
Yes.
And then I think Lindsey and Styles, you can probably kind of mix and match a little bit to the field. Sometimes they'll be in the slot, sometimes they'll be outside.
Yep.
That's where I kind of see it. Like I don't think Jaden Thomas I don't think he has enough juice to be a true boundary type receiver. I think he needs to kind of navigate space a little more in the slot.
As he gets older and learns more technique, maybe. Because he doesn't know how to use his size right now on the outside. That's the problem with Jaden. He doesn't know how to use his size. He's still a young receiver. He's a sophomore who didn't play like 2 snaps last year. Right? So he's still learning. Maybe down the road, but to your point, I think the boundary for me would be some combination of Michael Mayer, Tobias Merriweather, and Deion Colsey, with Tobias also playing some more to the field. Just because he needs to be doing those different looks as well. I still like Braden outside. I just would do more different things as opposed to like stacks and motions and things like that. I think that I don't have a problem with Braden being inside. I don't know if Braden has Braden's hands get knocked more than they should, but it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, he's not a really super clean pass catcher where I would want him getting balls thrown in tight windows over the slot. That's just not really where I would want him to be. He's also his functional strength also isn't as good as other players, so I don't want him getting knocked around as much as a pure slot. But there are looks that you could see that, Ryan, certainly. But especially if you're going to do jets and bubbles and stuff like that, I don't want him doing more of the vertical stuff so much from the slot. But there are things you can do with stacks and motions and different things like that allow him to play outside. So I would have, I would have some sort of Lindsey and Merriweather combination outside of the field. I would have some kind of Mayer, Colsey, and a little bit of Merriweather to the boundary. And then I would also have Thomas, Styles in the slot would be my rotation in the slot. That's how I would go with this. And I'd put Joe Wilkins in the boundary a little bit as well. I do think Joe can do some things from the boundary as a blocker and, where he can give you some snaps there, and so he'd be another guy I'd say maybe get 5 snaps a game as a boundary guy if he's healthy. Crystal Rose, how would you manage Estime this week? Would you feed him to let him get his mojo back or ride out with Diggs and Tyree and see if they can get rolling with more carries?
It's an interesting question. Crystal, I'm always an advocate of when a player has a struggle to come back to him quickly, right? So I think what you saw last week is Estime with the late fumble. Obviously, that was a big difference in the football game. But I think that for me personally, Brian, I think I would go to Estime a lot more early on in this football game to really start getting his confidence back a little bit because. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to play all 3 guys. Like I need to mix and match the skill sets that all Estime, Diggs, and Tyree have, but I'm just a huge advocate of, as from a coaching perspective, a guy is losing a little bit of confidence. Maybe they had a tough moment to show that, hey man, I'm not giving up on you, right? Like I'm coming right back to you. So I hope that they do give Estime a few touches early on, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be a pretty even workload from a touches perspective.
It should be a pretty even workload. Yes.
Yeah.
Mike Sullivan says, I want to see how USC reacts. I think they fall apart now. I think this is the week that Notre Dame shows they have the culture to build something special. Notre Dame destroys everyone but Clemson and get Reese. I'm not sure what that last part means, but I don't know. I don't know if USC is going to collapse because of this loss. I mean, we'll find out. I think they've got a week to sit on it, right? They're off this week, so they got a week to sit on it. But, when you look at their schedule, Ryan, there's a couple really tough games coming up. But I think that their schedule sets up somewhat favorably moving forward to where, I think they'll be able to bounce back, right? So that they're off this week and then they play at Arizona and then they're home against Cal and Colorado. I just don't see them losing those games. Even if they're emotionally not fragile, I still don't see losing those games. I mean, especially to Colorado and Cal at home. I just don't see that. Maybe they get shocked by Arizona on the road, but I mean, Arizona's getting better under Jed Fish. There's still a big talent gap between Arizona and USC, Ryan. So I don't necessarily see that. And Mike, my thing is, even if USC doesn't handle this correctly, I think it is go out talent the next three teams. That's my whole point. And then after that, you end tough. You're at UCLA and then home against Notre Dame. I mean, that's when we'll finally see, if they've really got it going. But I don't see that one. And then we got two more questions we're going to get to. I'm going to save the super chat for the last. Brandon Plensner says, B. Ryan, how does Freeman convince a 2023 quarterback to play at Notre Dame in this offense? It's a good question, Ryan.
Brandon, I think the big way that you do it is, one, you show growth down the stretch, right? You show that you can get a quarterback in solid position. But my biggest sell is like right now, hey, man, you have an opportunity to come in and play. Like that's point blank period to it, right? Like if you come in and you do a great job and you have a chance to compete, maybe you can have a chance to win some significant snaps as a freshman. Because right now you have Drew Pine, you have Tyler Buckner, who's not been able to stay healthy, and you have Steve Angeli and Ron Powell III as well. Like that's your roster right now. There's not a lot of proven there, right? So I think the sell for me, Brian, is like, hey, man, Avery Johnson, you want to come here, man? You'll get a chance to play early on. Like if you come in and you're the guy, then you're the guy. Like that's all it is, right? So I think competition is the biggest thing. I think right now, with the unfortunate lack of development at quarterback for Notre Dame, you can sell an opportunity early on for playing time. You can sell that.
There's several other reasons. Number one, no one's going to recruit offensive line better than us or coach it. Notre Dame's running back field is loaded, and it's only getting better. You got reinforcements coming in next year in Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love, Jade Lamar, a bunch of four-star kids. You've got Tobias Merriweather showing himself off to be hopefully a talented freshman. You have arguably, if not, it might not be if they get Tayshaun Lyons, I don't think it's even arguable that you have the best group of skilled receivers coming in next year of anyone in the country. You're always going to be loaded at tight end.
Yep.
The talent's going to be there around you. You now have to convince them that here's how it'll be different for you, how we develop. That's going to be the big hang up. But there's a lot to sell in the younger classes. And that's where the whole lack of talent thing can play to your advantage if you really believe that and spin that, because you can say, hey, look, our upper classes have a lot of talent. That's why we're struggling, right? That's why we need you, right? That's why you got to come here, because we need you to be the guy throwing the ball to Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James and Rico and Dylan Edwards and Cooper Flanagan and hopefully Tayshaun Lyons and Jeremiah Love and Jaden Lamar. We need you to be handing off the ball to Jadarian Price and Jaden Lamar and Jeremiah Love. And, hey, man, look, and we got Eli Raridan and Holden Stace, they're talented tight ends. Kane Barong. Look at the offensive line we have. We have two sophomores at offensive tackle. We signed the number one offensive line class in the country last year. We got a pretty good offensive line class coming in next year. We got a top guy coming in the year after that. There's a lot to sell. It's just the product on the field's not good right now. And that's the holdup. But I think it's more about the strategy has been very flawed. And it's been that way for years. The quarterback recruiting strategy at Notre Dame has been so taking kids too early or being late on certain kids that you could have got who are really talented. It's been a hot mess in several years and has been completely mishandled in 22 and 23, especially. This was especially poor. Here's the last one, Ryan. I think there's no other super chat, so this is going to be the last question. This is going to be a fun one. Connor Grant with a super chat. Thank you, Connor. Would a Bryce Young, CJ Stroud on this team hide the offensive problems, or are we still 3-3? Yes and no.
Yes and no to which part?
Yes, it would have hid the problems. No, they would not be 3-3.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
we're on the same page.
It's like it's what we said about Clemson. Clemson went to the playoff back-to-back years when in conversation, and Ryan and I, you and I weren't as close then, but we talked about going into last season, me and Vince, and I'm sure you felt the same way because I know how you feel about Tony Elliott was Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne masked a lot of problems at Clemson.
Yep. And
here's the deal. If Clemson's not 7-0 right now, if Tony Elliott's their offensive coordinator, they're not.
Agree.
I don't know what happened, but he was just not good anymore. And so, yes, you'd have had similar to that. they'd be in a better position, right? I mean, you'd have a veteran quarterback, things would have been different. And then with CJ Stroud, it would have meant that he wasn't playing for Ohio State. Kyle McCord would have started, but Kyle McCord's a year, isn't quite where CJ Stroud is yet. Mm-hmm. So yes, Notre Dame would be 6-0 right now with one of those two guys at quarterback. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, because I don't know if they still would beat Clemson or USC or a playoff game. I think we go back to where we were before, where one of the positives, if Coach Freeman handles this correctly, is that there are some things about your program that we knew were problems or we didn't know were problems, both, that are being exposed now, that were masked because last year's schedule was really soft and you had a veteran quarterback that saved you from stuff. Right. And now it's being exposed. So now you got to fix it. Right. It's been exposed. It stings. It hurts right now, but you fix it. Right. And that's what Coach Freeman is tasked with doing. That those guys would have hid. Right. And you don't know if would they have reared their ugly heads when it was too late? That's the question. But yes, they would have definitely hid problems on offense. And like quarterback hasn't been not an issue. It's just not been the issue people have made it out to be. Right, like they're not 3-3 because of the quarterback position, but they're also not 3-3. They're not also, they would be 6-0. I mean, it's the point is, like, we're putting too much on the quarterbacks, but the quarterbacks aren't the only problem, Ryan. They're not the primary reason they're 3-3. They are part of the issue, but they're not even in my top 3 overall big picture. There's been a game here, Marshall game. Tyler Buchner was not good. Tyler Buchner's not why they lost to Ohio State, right? Drew Pine was why they lost to Stanford indirectly, but I don't put it on him because I think he was put in a bad position. So I don't put that on Drew Pine, even though, you may look at it and say, well, his numbers were this and he missed this chance and that chance. I still put that on the coaching staff. And so I don't think the quarterback's the primary problem. They're a byproduct. The quarterback play has been a byproduct of bigger problems that having a star like Bryce Young, a proven star like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud would have fixed and masked. And so that's what I think about that. And same as Phil Dracovic never left and was still at Notre Dame. He would have masked some of this stuff too, but it still would have been there.
Agree.
So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. That was a long but fun show, everybody. I appreciate you all very much for being a part of it. Really good crowd today. Very active crowd today. Ryan, good job today on the predictions. Going to be a fun weekend of football. There's no doubt. Hopefully Notre Dame can get on the winning track in the impressive fashion needed. So for Brian, I'm Ryan. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Check out the merch store. Check out Built Bar. And of course, Ryan, sign up for the boards at boardsirishbreakdown.com. Check out all of our prediction articles and other content we have on the front page at irishbreakdown.com. Have a great weekend. We will see you all tomorrow night. But before that, Sean and Vince will be here tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern to noon, previewing the Notre Dame UNLV game from their perspective and also looking at some of the big games from the weekend of college football. You'll see Ryan and I tomorrow after the show for the UNLV postgame show along with Sean Davis. So have a great rest of your evening. Enjoy some high school football. We will see you all tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.